Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, when my mother had her first stroke in July of 1996, even though I was 18 years old at the time, I knew something was seriously wrong with her, but my mother was in complete denial. I sneakily suspect this was because she had an intrinsic fear of doctors. My mother was pretty much in denial about many things in her life, which also included her age, her weight, and any numbers connected with blood sugar or blood pressure. She had ceased to remember how old she was on purpose, and refused to get on a scale, so that she wouldn't have to witness the ugly numbers, revealing the horrifying truth of her steadily increasing waistline. It was so much better as far as she was concerned, being ignorant about things you'd rather not know about, because if you pretended the problem didn't exist, maybe it would mysteriously just disappear and go away from her life. Melt away like the butter on a warm bagel. My mother was a little on the plump side. She wasn't a big woman, but she was carrying about 50 pounds of extra weight that it wouldn't have harmed her to lose. She would tell me she never ate anything after she'd packed away an entire loaf of brown bread and peanut butter with jelly as a snack. She'd be genuinely mystified as to how she could have been putting on weight when she told me in no uncertain terms that she ate like a mouse. I knew very well she didn't eat like a mouse, but more like a hungry, rabid dog, with extensive portion sizes. She regularly cleaned out the pantry until all that was left was the staples like dried pasta, tinned tomatoes and rice. Once she munched a whole packet of cat pellets that I'd put in a plastic container as the bag had broken and fallen apart. She hadn't realized that they were cat biscuits. "Please remind me never to get those again," she said. "Those are far too fishy for my liking." Years ago I had clandestinely discovered my mother's secret stash of chocolates, candies, cookies, chips and peanuts that she hid discreetly in a box in her closet. But I never confronted her about her dirty little secret. The truth was that I often raided her stash myself for a candy bar or a treat of some kind, so I wasn't going to protest about something I could enjoy the benefits of myself. "I eat so terribly little," she would complain, "but unlike your Aunt Jane, even though she's my non-identical twin, I'm the unfortunate one that is biologically impaired. I've inherited a crap metabolism. How fair is that, I ask you? Why do I always draw the short end of the straw? My body has an inability to burn calories. It simply looks at food and hoovers the energy up, placing it directly into my fat cells, without any discrimination." "Mum, you're being ridiculous. You're in such denial, but you're not fooling anyone," I would say. "I cannot think what you're talking about, Juvenna," my mother said to me. "Can you not see, theoretically, I should look much the same as my twin sister Jane does? But I don't. Explain that conundrum to me, will you? I'm at least 80 pounds heavier than your aunt. Your Aunt Jane can look at food and just lose weight. When I look at food, my fat cells perversely inflate like a hot air balloon on takeoff. It's a cruel world we live in, Juvenna, and I'm sorry, but God does play favourites. Don't be ridiculous, Mum. God loves us all exactly the same. That is not true, Juvenna. I think God decided I was meant to be Porky. I had to be the porky one out of the two of us. I can't for the life of me understand why we are twins, me and your Aunt Jane. Yet my metabolism is flailing badly on me. Mum, you're talking nonsense. You've got a fabulous metabolism. There's nothing wrong with it at all. You eat a lot. That's your problem. Most people, if they ate as much as you, would be 3 times heavier than you are. I'm sure you and Aunt Jane have identical metabolisms. But unlike you, Aunt Jane doesn't get desperate to snack all the time. I bet she's never accidentally raided the cat pellets like you did that time. Don't you remember? My mother groaned. You love telling everybody about that, don't you, Juvenna? Look at the smirk on your face. You don't look half pleased with yourself. I bet you've told all your friends at school that your mother ate the cat pellets. You love humiliating me, don't you, Juvenna? You get some kind of a rise out of it. You've got to admit it is funny, Mum. Only you could ever eat a bag of cat pellets and not even know what you were eating. They weren't fit for human consumption, I don't suspect. So what if I told my friends about it? They thought it was hilarious too. So on this day, when I noticed the troubling droop of my mother's mouth on one side of her face, I was naturally convinced my mother had had a stroke and told her as much. I was no medical expert, of course, but I did know about the symptoms of a stroke, which I suspect has got to be standard knowledge. Your mouth doesn't look right, Mum, I told her. My mother examined her face in the mirror and was visibly affronted by the lopsided droop of her mouth, which she tried to correct with a few facial exercises, but her mouth was resolutely determined to droop on one side. I kid you not, my mother simply shrugged her shoulders nonchalantly, as if it was no big deal. It'll go away, she said resolutely. I probably pressed my face into the pillow last night rather hard, and it inadvertently pulled my mouth downwards. I'm not as young as I used to be, Juvenna. Things don't always bounce back the way they did when I was a lot younger. My collagen levels in the face are seriously depleted. My face is like an old mattress these days. Not much spring left in it, I'm afraid. When you get to my age, you'll understand all about the sagging that comes along when age hits you squarely in the face on the very first day you turn 40. Without apology, I must say. I was in disbelief with my mother's insouciant indifference. Surely she must realize she'd had a stroke. How could she behave like this? It was so typical of her to make light of a life-threatening situation, which, if not treated at once, could potentially happen all over again, and this time with more severe consequences. My mother wasn't stupid. It was one thing to be in denial of your weight or your age, but quite another to be in denial about your health conditions. And having a stroke that you refuse to admit is a stroke is borderline insane as far as I'm concerned. I clandestinely hoped people who worked at the bank with my mother would notice the strange droop of my mother's face and realize that she must have experienced a stroke. Maybe they would insist that she seek medical help at once. I suspected the stroke had happened in the early hours of the morning. It'll come right, my mother said resolutely, examining her face in the mirror and applying some ruby red lipstick to her lips. I'll be fine. It doesn't look that bad. You barely notice it, Juvenna. I don't agree. I think it's very conspicuous. You need to go and see someone, Mum. But trying to persuade my mother to do the right thing regarding her health was rather like throwing water on a duck's back. Nothing was going to sink in or penetrate her waterproof plumage. Mum, take a look in the mirror. Something's seriously wrong with your face, can't you see? Look at your mouth on the left-hand side. It's drooping down badly. It's in a strange position. And then what about your eyes? They're both looking in completely different angles. One eye is looking one way, the other another way. And I'm sorry, Mum, that's not normal. Your eyes have never done that before. It's got nothing to do with the elasticity of your skin, Mum. Anybody can see that. You need to understand one thing about my mother. She hated doctors with a burning passion and didn't trust them as far as you could throw them. My mother never went to a doctor, and let's just say even if she was on her last legs, I doubt she'd ever go willingly. I remember once when she had pneumonia and refused to go to a doctor until my Aunt Jane called one out for her all the way from the Rocky Mountains in Canada. We live in Los Angeles, so my aunt had to call a doctor in Los Angeles from such a long distance away, which was ridiculous, and was a first for Dr. Eidsman, I suspect. With my mother's apparent stroke, this was a similar emergency as far as I was concerned, and realizing the gravity of a medical situation that my mother was willfully choosing to ignore, and was viewing with as much disinterest and disdain as buying the wrong brand of Cheerios from the store, I knew what needed to be done to get reinforcements on my side, to make my mother finally see sense, if that were at all possible. I sneakily phoned my Aunt Jane, all the way in the Rocky Mountains in Canada, to tell her what was going on with my mother, and how she'd woken up that morning with half her face looking disfigured, and one side hanging downwards in a sizable droop. I absolutely knew my mother would not listen to me. I was 18 years old after all, still a kid as far as my mother was concerned. She'd tell me I was only interested in fashion and boys, so what did I know about anything at all? When Dr. Eidsman arrived on the scene, when my Aunt Jane had called him about her bad bout of pneumonia, which occurred about 3 years prior to the stroke incident, I remember he was horrified to witness my mother's grievous condition, and wondered why my mother had not sought medical attention immediately. "Pneumonia is a serious business," he told her gravely. "This is no laughing matter. You're lucky to be alive. You shouldn't toy with your health, Mrs. Carverson." "It was just a silly little cold, Doctor, that's all," my mother insisted, while she was coughing and spluttering like it was nobody's business, and working her way through 15 boxes of tissues that I had bought for her. "Why is everybody making such a dreadful fuss? I've just got the sniffles and a rather dry cough, that's all. I'll be absolutely fine." But fine she was not. She was immediately sent to hospital for her recovery, and was retained for a week in a hospital bed. When I went to visit her in hospital, she looked as miserable as an inmate on death row. She blamed Aunt Jane, of course, for calling the doctor out, but I suspect my Aunt Jane may very much have saved her life. Once again history was repeating itself, as I suspected it would, but I never thought a health drama would ensue as quickly as it did, especially under our roof only 3 years later. I've always believed that lightning can very definitely strike in the same place twice. Indeed, I know a friend of my mother's who was struck by lightning 3 times in a row. His name is Rory Thomas, and I know for a fact that he's rather proudly framed the clothes he was wearing when he was struck by lightning in a large picture frame in the hallway of his home. All his clothes in this visibly explicit display are singed and very badly burnt, with ragged holes and frays in the fabric. He says every time people visit his house, they stare in abject horror at the picture frame of his clothes in the hallway, and marvel at how it was possible he could have survived a lightning strike like that, when his clothes are obviously badly burned. It's a great conversation piece for all his dinner guests, I'm told. He seems incredibly pleased with the fact that he's fought Mother Nature 3 times and won. That's how he clearly sees it. I asked him why he thought he'd been struck so many times by lightning, and he believes some people are more predisposed to being struck by lightning than others. He thinks he's one of those unfortunate people who seems to attract lightning. In my mother's current health crisis, I was stuck between a rock and a hard place, so I decided to phone my Aunt Jane, all the way in the Canadian Rockies, to tell her the dreadful, rather sobering news, and that my mother's face had gone all funny, and her eyes were a bit odd. I knew my mother wouldn't be remotely amused by what I had done so treacherously behind her back, but that couldn't be helped. She would be furious, and she certainly had been that morning, when I had attempted to call an ambulance out. But she had stopped me in the process, looking at me with glaring eyes like a snarling cat, and saying to me, "Juvenna, don't you dare even think about it." I had a sense that if anyone could persuade my mother to seek medical attention, It would of course be her twin, well, her non-identical twin sister, Aunt Jane, which was why I called her. But I did so from the neighbour's house, so my mother couldn't witness my traitorous call. What do you mean your mother's face has gone all funny, and her eyes are odd? Asked Aunt Jane. Is she still walking around normally and talking? It's hard to explain, Aunt Jane. She's perfectly normal, in a manner of speaking. She's her usual mulishly stubborn self, if you know what I mean. But her mouth's gone all wonky and droopy on one side of her face. Both her eyes are bulging like an insect and looking in different directions. It's not normal, Aunt Jane. I couldn't do that to my eyes, Aunt Jane. Even if I tried. I'm really worried about her. Something's not right. Of course you're worried, Juvena, and rightly so by the sounds of things. I'm so terribly glad you phoned me to inform me about this. Honestly, your mother is absolutely incorrigible, and not in a good way. That sister of mine is so damned bloody-minded. She wouldn't know what was good for her if it slapped her brazenly in the face. I'm sure by the sounds of things, your mother has had a stroke. It's important to get her to the doctor at once. I cannot stress this enough, Juvena. This is very serious. Your mother needs prompt medication to thin the blood, so this doesn't happen again. Because believe me, it will happen again if she doesn't get help now. If she has a blood clot, for example, it could easily reoccur. Ostensibly, her next stroke could be rather incapacitating. Some people who have strokes spend months in recuperation. Others, I hasten to say, are not so lucky. It does depend, of course, on what side of the brain has been affected by the stroke. But they're serious, and sometimes they can kill you outright. I knew something wasn't right, Aunt Jane. I'm so glad I phoned you. Mum wouldn't let me call an ambulance. Can you believe that? Your mother is the absolute end, Juvena. There are no words to describe her insouciance. Please can I speak to your mother right now? I know what she's like. That sister of mine is always in denial, pretending nothing is wrong, when something so very clearly is. Sometimes I despair with her. Remember when she had pneumonia 3 years ago? The way she behaved back then. It was deplorable. Common sense has never been one of her strong points, I'm afraid. Good job I've got enough for both of us. She needs a long, hard talking to, that's for sure. That's why I called you, Aunt Jane. But you better phone her yourself. I'm calling you from my neighbour's house, so Mum can't see me. She pulled out the plug from the landline when I tried to call an ambulance. Mum says her mouth will be normal again. She doesn't need a doctor, but I know she does. She needs help. And I just don't know what to do. I feel helpless. You should have seen how she lashed out at me when I tried to call the ambulance. She was absolutely furious, Aunt Jane. Aunt Jane let out an exasperated groan. I could hear her frustration in her disquieted voice. Even though I couldn't physically see her, I knew she was shaking her short head of grey curls that was neatly cropped around her face in a trendy avant-garde hairstyle, and the grey hair always made her grey-blue eyes look even more striking. If she had lived close to us, she would have driven over to our house in a heartbeat. But me, my mother, and my 5-year-old brother lived in Los Angeles, so there was a considerable geographical difference between where we lived and where Aunt Jane resided. She was the one that had visited us in Los Angeles as regular as clockwork, 5 times a year, and she would always spend Christmas and Thanksgiving with us, as my mother didn't want to travel all the way to Canada. My mother loathed travelling of any kind. She didn't like to spend time away from the creature comforts of home, and refused to leave our cat Dorothy in the charge of a stranger. I will not leave Dorothy unattended, she would insist. Dorothy is my baby. She needs to be watched over very carefully. She likes her chicken poached in bone broth, and no one knows how to do it like I do. It was ironic that Dorothy, our cat, was as bloody-minded as my mother was. Whenever we tried to take her to the vet, she'd cower under the bed and refuse to come out. My mother and her cat were reflections of each other, and I secretly suspect my mother saw herself in Dorothy, and was thus completely devoted to that cat. If she had to choose between me and my brother Lankum and Dorothy the cat, I'm afraid me and my brother would definitely draw the short straw. I kind of think my mother liked the geographical distance between her and Aunt Jane. It meant that Aunt Jane, being the sensitive, prudent one of the two twins, who had the propensity to be quite bossy towards my mother when she wanted to be, was far enough away for my mother to turn a deaf ear to Aunt Jane when she chose to. Aunt Jane made it her business to watch over our mother, because she knew only too well how obstinately resistant my mother could be towards any seasoned, well-meaning advice that would likely serve her very best interests. I was very glad I had successfully managed to rather discreetly sneak a phone call to Aunt Jane in the Rocky Mountains in Canada from the neighbour's house, as in those days cell phones were a luxury only the future promised. I was very grateful when I returned to the house that my mother had thankfully plugged the phone back into the socket. She answered it when it rang. She was expecting a call from a girlfriend of hers to arrange a lunch date. I breathed a huge sigh of relief. I knew Aunt Jane was on the other end of the phone, and I could only pray that my mother would listen to the wizened advice of her salient twin sister. My mother spent a long while ranting with Aunt Jane on the phone, who was the antithesis to her in every single regard. My mother began waving the telephone in her hand furiously, as if she'd like it to give it a good old thump. It was very clear to me she was very annoyed by Aunt Jane's telephone call. Even to look at, they were considerably different. My unathletic mother was like a cuddly teddy bear, with a well-rounded abdomen and droopy shoulders. She dyed her hair auburn and always wore bright red lipstick and eyeliner. Aunt Jane never wore a stick of makeup a day in her life, was as slim as a string bean, with an enviable figure that made everything she wore look streamlined and neat. The two women may have shared the same womb together, but they couldn't have been more different if they'd tried. Having said that, both women had chosen never to get married, so I suppose they did have that in common. Me and my brother, whose name was Lankham, were both named after cosmetic houses. My mother wanted to call me an unusual name when I was born, so she looked at her skincare preparation that she was using on her face. She decided that Juvena would suit me fine. I don't say this proudly, but me and my brother Lankham were both products of my mother's one-night stands, which she deliberately engineered when she was ovulating, in the hope she'd fall pregnant. She was using the men for an ulterior motive that they knew nothing about, so she didn't have to acquire the expensive services of a sperm donation bank, which I'm sure in itself comes with a hefty price tag. She had purposely seduced these men to surreptitiously acquire their sperm, as this was a cheap, efficient way to get pregnant fast. My mother very briefly chose the men she wanted to father her children based on physical appearances, and then artfully seduced them, assuring them that she was on the contraceptive pill, so that she could pull the wool over their eyes, and they would be clueless that in their brief interaction with my mother they had biologically sired a child that they themselves would never get to know about. As a consequence, I knew that me and my brother would never be able to find our birth fathers, but I had come to terms with that a long time ago, and it never really bothered me in the slightest. It was years later my mother decided to have another baby, engineering the same duplicitous scheme to acquire some sperm. I think she panicked when she was in her 40s, realizing that if she wanted a baby now, she couldn't afford to wait any longer. Luckily, the bank where my mother worked as a secretary was very generous towards pregnant women, giving them time off with full pay. My mother fell pregnant with my 5-year-old brother Lankham, and I was the one that was to take care of him after school, while my mother was working. I'd pick him up from the nursery every day, and we would walk home together hand in hand. I was smitten over my little brother, with his cute cherub face and his bright green eyes. No one in our family had green eyes, so maybe he had inherited these traits from his father, a father we'd never get to know. I think my mother and Aunt Jane's aversion towards men stems from the fact that both girls had grown up in a household where their battered mother was beaten to black and blue within an inch of her life by their bombastic, overbearing, very disagreeable father, who had such a foul mouth on him, no amount of bleach could have wiped his dirty words away. My mother told me that her mother was permanently going to the ER to have stitches or treatment for a broken nose, ankle, wrist, or a black eye, and so forth. The nurses at the local hospital knew exactly what was going on, and about the domestic abuse my grandmother was obviously being subjected to on a regular basis. They kept urging her to file a police report against her husband, but my grandmother point-blank refused to do so. It seems stubbornness runs through our family bloodline, and my mother's mulish ways were inherited from her own mother. One time my grandfather hit my grandmother so hard that several teeth flew out of her mouth and scattered all over their carpet, like tiny pieces of flying shrapnel. My mother and her sister Jane gathered them up together, thinking that their mother would get lots and lots of money from the tooth fairy that night if they soaked her teeth in a glass of water. But instead of attaining money in a glass of water, she ended up having to get dentures on all of her teeth. My grandfather never apologized to his wife for his pugnacious outbursts, but claimed my grandmother was at fault. She had provoked him to anger. "You stupid, stupid woman! If you weren't so damned harebrained and scatty with your head in the clouds all the time, I wouldn't get so hopping mad, would I?" he would complain. "You're the one that makes me lash out at you, because you make me hopping mad. I wouldn't normally lash out at a woman, but you're the one that rubs me up the wrong way. What happened to you is hardly my fault. You brought it on yourself." It would seem both my mother and Aunt Jane realized the real reason their long-suffering mother had stayed in the dysfunctional relationship for so long with their father was she was financially dependent on him. On the day he died from a sudden massive heart attack, my grandmother had celebrated her newfound freedom and independence. The life insurance and pension my grandfather had bequeathed her set her up for life. My mother told me that as my grandfather's coffin was lowered into the ground, no one shed a single tear for him, and after he was buried, the family looked sizably relieved, almost as if a huge weight had been lifted off their lives. When my mother told me this rather sad, disheartening story, I felt rather sorry for my grandfather. He had died without anyone grieving his loss, almost as if his life on this earth had been pretty meaningless. Apparently his own mother, who would have been my great-grandmother, had been at the funeral and had said, "Thank God he's gone. I never cared for my son very much. He was always such a bully." Which is damning as an indictment when your own mother fails to grieve your loss, which speaks volumes about how disagreeable my grandfather must have been in life. To all intensive purposes, both my mother and Aunt Jane were to see their demure, rather reticent mother become like a colourful butterfly emerging from a cocoon after her husband's demise. My grandmother had always been an excellent baker, and had blossomed. Many described her as looking as if she'd dropped 20 years overnight. She even ambitiously started up her own cake business, which would never have been possible if my grandfather was alive. She had thrived, enabling her to acquire confidence that had been sorely lacking in her marriage. She had believed her husband when he had vindictively accused her of being useless and nothing but a waste of space. In truth, my grandmother would say, if her husband was still alive, he'd barely recognize her anymore, because gone was the shrinking Violet, who had successfully transformed herself into an assertive, very self-assured professional woman, who wouldn't suffer fools gladly. Well, not any more, that is. My mother always believed the negative influences her father had bestowed over their young lives had galvanized her desire to stay well away from marriage of any kind. So any relationships my mother had enjoyed with men had been fleeting, rather like ships passing through the night. She had liked it that way. Even when a couple of men had fallen for her hard, she had pushed them away, as such was her dreadful fear of getting seriously entangled with a man. For in my mother's distorted, rather misguided opinion, if there was one bad apple in the barrel, then they were likely all bad. I think she believed if she got married, the man in question would mysteriously morph into my grandfather, and then begin to abuse her. Aunt Jane seemed to have a similar attitude towards men, as her bitter experience with my father had been badly soiled by the tempestuous relationship he had shared with their mother. So both women had distorted views on marriage, which was clearly apparent. Unlike my mother, Aunt Jane had never shown any particular interest in men. She had no desire to have children, although she loved the bones of me and my brother Lancome. I guess when children are growing up, they're very impressionable, and the way they are raised can have far-reaching consequences on their future choices in adulthood. I think in my mother and Aunt Jane's case, It's safe to say their father's pugnacious outbursts, temper tantrums, rages, and constant degrading of their mother had sworn them off men for life. From the moment my mother had left college, she became fiercely independent and worked as a secretary for a CEO at a large American bank. Aunt Jane was very good with her hands and quite domesticated like her mother had been, so she worked her magic on the sewing machine and had started up her own business making dresses for an exclusive designer shop, which included stunning bridal gowns for brides and elegant evening dresses for glamorous functions. Aunt Jane was sensible and efficient. She ate 3 meals a day, with no in-between snacking. She took good care of herself, and at the first sign of a sneeze or a high raging temperature, she'd visit her doctor for a checkup. Where she was wise and discerning, my mother regretfully chose to be naively ignorant. I knew categorically that if my mother would listen to anyone, I hoped it would be with my Aunt Jane.
"For God's sake, Zoe, what on earth has got into you?"
said Aunt Jane.
"I've just been on the telephone to Giovanna. She tells me you woke up with your face all disfigured, or should I say drooping on one side, and I believe your eyes are rather odd. Now I'm extremely worried about your welfare, Zoe. I think you've had a stroke. You need to seek medical attention at once." "I can't believe Giovanna went behind my back like this and phoned you all the way in the Rocky Mountains to tell you this. Honestly, that daughter of mine is the end. She's a liability. She's overreacting. There's nothing wrong with me at all. I probably got my face tangled up in a pillow and was lying in an awkward position. You know what it's like."
"No, I do not know what it's like, Zoe," protested Aunt Jane.
"Honestly, Zoe, you are the end. You and I well know that you don't wake up in the morning with one side of your face looking lopsided. My guess is you must have had a stroke, and if you don't get to the doctors quick, you risk having another one, and that's terribly dangerous. I suspect they'll run some tests on you, give you some blood thinners like warfarin to prevent another stroke. But you need to see someone at once. I don't want to lose my only sister. Why don't you give Dr. Eitzman a call? That doctor's absolutely amazing. He'll know what to do. I'll phone him myself if you like I did last time when you had pneumonia." "Oh, for goodness sake, Jane, would you please stop fussing? Why on earth do you always have to overreact? Make such a big deal out of something that is so insignificant and so unimportant. You and Giovanna are both made of the same cloth. You're like 2 peas in a pod. You can't resist putting your nose into everybody else's business. Thank goodness you don't live next door to me. I'd be in purgatory if you did. I told you I'm perfectly fine, Jane. I am very annoyed with Giovanna. I can't believe how sneaky she was, going behind my back like that to phone you from the neighbour's house. She's making you panic for no reason at all. I have not had a stroke. The idea is ludicrous. I'm not even that old. I'm in my 40s, for goodness sake. People can have strokes at any age, Zoe. They're not just reserved for the elderly, you know. Now, please don't get mad at Giovanna. She's looking out for you, as am I. And it's a good thing that we are, because you're clearly not taking good care of yourself. I'm warning you, Zoe. If you don't go and see Dr. Eitzman, I'm going to get the next flight from Canada and drag you to see him myself, as quickly as I possibly can. Is that understood? All right, I will go and see Dr. Eitzman, if it makes you happy, Jane. I'll make an appointment to see him, but there is nothing wrong with me. I can assure you of that. You promise me you will go, Zoe. I'm trusting you to do the right thing. Now, I don't want you letting me down. I know what you're like about doctors, Zoe. Even when we were children, every time you went to the doctors, you would run and hide. You know that doctors want the very best for you. But Dr. Eitzman is a darling. You'll be in very good hands with him. Honestly, I don't know why you have such a bee in your bonnet about doctors. I believed my mother when she claimed to have been to see Dr. Eitzman. I really did. She said she'd suffered a mini-stroke and that it wasn't a big deal. She returned home with blood thinners. Well, that's what she told me anyway. She said the people at work thought she might have had a stroke and had encouraged her to seek medical help. Happy now, she said, making a face at me. It's no big deal. Dr. Eitzman says I will be absolutely fine. Little did I know that this was a barefaced lie on my mother's part, and she was quite literally playing Russian roulette with her life. The madly annoying woman had not gone to see the doctor at all. What did Dr. Eitzman say? I asked her, because more fool me, I actually believed her lofty story. Haven't you heard a word I've said, Juvena? Why don't you listen? Where are your ears? If I didn't know any better, I'd say you didn't own any. As I was saying, Dr. Eitzman said I'd be fine. My mother lied. He's given me some meds that I'm going to take. I'll be as right as rain. I had phoned Aunt Jane to tell her the great news. My aunt had sighed with relief, telling me she would phone my mother in an hour or so to find out what Dr. Eitzman had said about her health. Thank God, said Aunt Jane. I cannot believe we got your mother to listen to us, Juvena. It was you, Aunt Jane. You're the only one that can ever talk sense to her. Well, she has been my twin all my life, has she not? So I know your mother's ways rather well. When they say there is nothing new under the sun, they're not lying about that. I'm afraid, Juvena, your mother is rather suspicious of the medical profession. And it didn't help when Mr. Donnelly died all those long years ago, because the doctor prescribed him the wrong medication. And when your mother heard that, she decided she'd never trust a doctor again. Your mother had a soft spot for Mr. Donnelly, you know. Who's Mr. Donnelly? I asked. I've never heard of him before. You wouldn't know him, love. He lived next door to us long before you were born. He went to the doctor for some medication. The doctor prescribed him the wrong stuff. He died at 32 years old. His wife was absolutely devastated, as you can imagine. It was proven to be a medical error on the doctor's part. And well, that story hit your mother very hard growing up. Mr. Donnelly had a soft spot for your mother. She'd go over to his house and they would play cards together. You know what your mother's like, fixated on cards. And Mr. Donnelly was too. So I guess they had a connection there. Mr. Donnelly didn't warm to me like he did with your mother. But after he died, your mother categorically insisted that no doctors could ever be trusted. No wonder Mum avoids doctors like the plague, I said. Well, the main thing is, love, she's on the blood-thinning medications now. She's been evaluated by a doctor. It sounds like she had a mini-stroke. But you can never be too careful, can you? I'm proud of you, Juvena, for promptly phoning me like you did. You might have saved your mother's life, you know.
It was an hour after my conversation with Aunt Jane. My mother experienced another stroke. She was unable to talk or move, so she couldn't exactly protest when I called an ambulance to take her to the hospital. I was to learn later that my mother had never visited Dr. Eitzman, as she had assured me she had done so. If she had sought out medical attention, as Aunt Jane had saliently advised, she would have not been fighting for her life in a hospital bed. My mother was placed on a ventilator and had a feeding tube inserted into her stomach. She was unable to talk or move her body on the left-hand side. She couldn't swallow, eat or drink. I felt so angry with her for her apathetic insouciance towards her health, because she had placed the whole family into an emotional turmoil, as we wondered whether she was going to actually live or die. It was touch and go for a while, especially when she got a bad infection that needed treating with antibiotics. It was during this harrowing, tumultuous time that the doctors at the hospital gave us a rather bleak prognosis concerning my mother's health, which had taken a dramatic turn for the worse. I was absolutely certain my mother was going to pass away, and judging by the expression on the doctor's face, I am certain he held little hope for her recovery. But one thing about my mother is she was always unpredictable and had always been a fighter. So she fought a stoic battle to overcome the adversity that held her fiercely under its formidable grip. Aunt Jane had flown over from Canada to be by my mother's side, and she was not amused in the slightest that my mother had fooled us in the cunning way she did, by pretending to get help from Dr. Eitzman when she never had. She shook her head of short grey curls contemptuously and said, "That sister of mine is her own worst enemy. We told her to go to the doctor, did we not, Juvena? And she never did. She betrayed our trust.
How could she lie to the both of us so brazenly? She convinced us she'd been to see him. The silly, silly woman. I despair sometimes with your mother. I really do. She brought this upon herself. I'm mad at her. I feel like boxing her ears. The doctor assured us that my mother was over her biggest hurdles and would make a good recovery, but it would be a long, laborious process of physio and speech therapy for her to get her back to normal. We were incredibly grateful she was still alive. It was decided that my mother would move in with my grandmother for a while, along with her beloved cat Dorothy, whom she couldn't bear to be without. I would swear my mother loved that cat more than the both of us. While my mother was recuperating, Aunt Jane invited us to live with her in Canada for a while. It might mean I would have to repeat my year at school when I returned to Los Angeles, but that was the least of our concerns. Lankham was only 5 years old, so he didn't have much comprehension with what was going on with my mother at the time, and appeared to be rather confused and befuddled.
"What is wrong with Mummy?" he asked me. "Is she going to be all right? Why can't she speak properly?" he asked, his brow folding into a serious line that made him suddenly look awfully grown up. He was a bright child, and so I knew I couldn't brush my mother's condition under the carpet and make light of it, and so I didn't. "Mum will be fine, Lankham," I told him, taking him lovingly into my arms. "She had a stroke, so her body's not working like it should be. But she'll get better, I promise. The doctors say she's making an astonishing recovery and remarkable progress, so she'll be just fine, I promise. She's going to stay with Granny for a while, who'll look after her every need, while we go and live with Aunt Jane in Canada. It'll be fun. Canada's a very nice place. You'll like it there." "But I don't want to go to Canada," said Lankham. "I like it here," he said, stamping his foot indignantly, looking up at me through his spirited, pleading green eyes. "Of course you like it here. I understand that, Lankham. All your friends are here. But we'll be back home with Mum before you can say Jack Robinson. We're not going to be in Canada for long. Mum just needs to focus on her recovery, doesn't she? And if we stay here, we might slow down her healing. And I'm sure you don't want that for her. She needs as little distraction as possible. If she knows Aunt Jane is watching over us in Canada, then she won't have to worry about us all the time, will she? She can focus on getting better, and that's what she needs to do." "But she will get better, won't she?" Lankham asked, looking rather bemused. "She's not going to die, is she?" "Of course she's not going to die. The doctor says she's got over the worst hurdles. She'll get better. You know what Mum's like. She's a fighter, so she's not going to die in a hurry." "But the bird I rescued the other day had a floppy head after Dorothy grabbed it. I put it into a shoebox, but it still died. Its head was like Mummy's, all floppy on one side." "Dorothy had a nasty go at that poor little bird," I told my brother reassuringly. "You know what Dorothy's like. That cat is a monster. She's a real huntress, isn't she? You were very kind to try and rescue the bird, Lankham, but you must remember the bird had a very big shock, being caught up in Dorothy's jaws. It must have been very scary for it. Imagine being so tiny and being caught up in a big pair of jaws like Dorothy's." "It must have been very scared," Lankham agreed. "Exactly. And I think that Dorothy injured its neck. So that's why its head was hanging funny. And that's probably why it died." "But I rescued it. I was hoping it was going to get better," said Lankham, staring at me earnestly through his pained green eyes. "I know you did, Lankham. But birds, they're not like us at all. They don't easily recover from shock. That's probably why the bird died. Birds are not like humans. But Mummy's different. She's stronger than a bird, so she's going to get better." Lankham looked heartily relieved when I told him this. It almost looked as if a huge weight had been lifted off his tiny little shoulders. "Will I be able to draw when I get to Canada?" he asked me. I laughed. I knew that Lancombe's favourite thing to do was to draw. One day when he'd run out of paper, he had drawn pictures over the walls of our home, and my mother had been far from amused by this. For a 5-year-old boy, Lancombe was showing potential in becoming quite the artist. He was always using his hands, moulding and making things out of scrunched paper, Play-Doh, and even clay. He would draw or paint at any given opportunity he was given. And even the nursery school teacher said she'd never seen a boy of such a young age draw so incredibly well. It did make me wonder if my little brother would one day become an aspiring artist. I do understand that my grandmother's father's father was a fabulous artist, and people of nobility back in the day would recruit him to paint them in oils. Some of his work can still be found in the residence of stately homes. Of course you'll be able to draw as much as you like. You can do whatever you want to when we get to Aunt Jane's in Canada. It'll be just like the things you do at home, only we'll be in a completely different place. I promise you we're going to have lots and lots of fun there. Aunt Jane has promised to take you to a special art shop that she knows to get you your essential supplies. After all, every artist needs the tools of the trade, don't they? At this, Lancombe's face lit up. Art supplies were much more exciting for him than the promise of candies or ice cream. It was spring when me and my brother arrived at Aunt Jane's wooden home in the Rocky Mountains. With only a couple of suitcases in our possession, they were almost antiques, they were so incredibly old. One of them had stickers on it marking the end of the Second World War, with signs that read, "Good always wins in the end," and "Remembering our lost fallen comrades for their heroism." There was a sticker advertising Dot's gumdrops, which I understand were the most popular candies in 1945. There was also a little caricature person on the logo, throwing up the drops in the air, labelled lime, orange, cherry and lemon. There was a sticker advertising Hershey's tropical bars, made by the Pacific Theatre Company, which were given to the American troops in 4-ounce packages in 1943. There were about 5 stickers on the front of my suitcase, advertising M&Ms, which were also given to the American troops. There was a picture of a soldier holding a packet of M&Ms in his hands, and there was a caption underneath that read, "You can carry me in your pockets, and I won't melt." It would seem me and my brother's time-worn, somewhat dilapidated suitcases were still surprisingly strong, and they told a story of a time around World War II. I was naturally surprised to learn from the stickers that M&Ms had been made especially for the American troops in the war. I had no idea they went back so far in our history, because they were one of my favourite candies. Aunt Jane's house was called the Torvalls. On the outside it resembled a sizable 2-storey exquisite all-wood Swiss chalet, with its floor-to-ceiling glass windows, extensive balconies overlooking prepossessing views of the mountains. When me and my brother Lancombe arrived at the Torvalls, I think the word to describe our reaction to Aunt Jane's house was we were both absolutely spellbound. We were locked under a bedazzling magic spell, or caught up in the 7th heaven, so to speak. I had never been so captivated or enchanted by so much beauty in all of my life. I don't think I ever believed such a natural, resplendent, real, raw, unadulterated beauty could actually exist. I now understood perfectly why Aunt Jane had made the Rocky Mountains in Canada her home. Aunt Jane told me these massive mountain ranges stretched like a large elastic band all the way from Canada to New Mexico, and this wilderness is composed of 250 acres of land, which is why it has been described as a rambler's paradise, and I could see why this was the case. The smouldering mountains confiscated the skyline with their glorious voluptuous contours that reminded me of Rubenesque women that you see in those old paintings. The house, known as the Torvalls, was reasonably modern-looking. It had been built in circa 1961 by a man called James Torvall, hence the name. The irony is the Torvalls today would probably be considered quite modern, with its high ceilings and generous Edwardian stone fireplaces. When Aunt Jane bought the house, it was alleged that James Torvall was selling the place because his wife Anna, a few weeks prior, had gone on a casual stroll in the woods and was never to be seen again. It was alleged that she might have been killed by an angry mother grizzly bear. It would seem someone local, a few weeks prior, had been attacked by a rogue bear. It was assumed the same grizzly had attacked Anna. But unlike the person that had escaped with his life by pretending to be dead, it would seem Anna had not fared so well. That was the conclusion of the police at the time, that had searched the area with a fine-tooth comb, to no avail. But Anna's body was never recovered, although there was evidence that a bear had recently been in the area, which lent credence to the idea that Anna had been ravaged by a grizzly. Aunt Jane had bought the house from James Torval at a troubling time in the man's life. He didn't wish to stay on the property any more, once his wife had vanished, which was perfectly understandable. It was said he was defeated by a great overwhelming grief. His wife Anna had been passionate about the Rocky Mountains and had always dreamed of waking up to idyllic mountain views every single day of her life. She adored working with oils on canvas and would regularly paint pictures of the idyllic scenery that surrounded her. Anna Torval was naturally gifted at all things creative. She had a natural flair for cooking, to painting and drawing with charcoal. James Torval had built his beloved wife her quintessential dream home, designing the place with so much attention to detail and no expense spared, so that his beloved, most beautiful wife could lie in the lap of luxury while thoroughly enjoying the serene, tranquil views over the mountains and painting to her heart's content. Once James Torval's wife had gone missing, his mountain home that invited so much promise made the man melancholic and lugubriously sorrowful, reflecting bitterly over his great loss. So that was when he decided to sell the Torvals to Aunt Jane, because it broke his heart to live in the house without Anna around. When Aunt Jane first moved into the Torvals, she said for a long time the house felt so morose and cheerless, almost as if a doleful, dark, inauspicious energy had greedily descended over the property, like a thick, forlorn, invisible, heavy-hearted fog, so that in the circumstances she very nearly considered selling it, because the pessimistic ambience it generated was not rubbing off on her positively. "I don't know," she told me, shaking her shock of grey curls. "When I first moved into the Torvals, I thought I'd quite literally hit the jackpot. I really did. I mean, it was just such a beautiful house, with no expense spared. So I got the place for an absolute steal, and I wasn't going to look a gift horse in the mouth. So I literally snatched it up in minutes after viewing it. I could see the Torvals had built the place with only love, and it was James who'd built this place for his wife because he adored her so much. I mean, look at the quality fixtures and fittings within the house. The man clearly wanted the best of everything in his life. The couple had no children, so no one could inherit the place, as Anna was unable to have any. I would be sitting at my table with my sewing machine in my sewing room, preparing a dress for a customer, and I would be hit with such a dreadful languishing melancholia for no reason at all. And I'm not an emotional person by any manner of means. I would almost tune into this pensively gloomy atmosphere that seemed to hoover up all the light in the house. I would begin to burst into tears and cry for no reason at all, and I've never ever done something like that before. I realized the Torvals was doing this to me, making me incredibly depressed and disenchanted about everything. I thought maybe I was picking up on James Torval's lamentable grief after the loss of his wife Anna, whom he knew was almost certainly dead. I always believe, Juvena, that houses absorb energy, and when something tragic has transpired in a house, you can so often pick up on the hapless, sombre vibe of the place. "I know what you mean, Aunt Jane," I said. "I went to stay at Clara's house for the weekend, 6 months after her grandmother passed away. Remember you met Clara Phillips when you were staying at our house last Thanksgiving. I'm sure you met her grandmother Maddie, because Mum invited the family for dinner. Do you remember?"
"Oh, yes, I do remember very well," said Aunt Jane reflectively. "I had no idea the lovely old lady had passed away. She was such a character. I'm so sorry to hear that, love. But I guess old age catches up with us all in the end, doesn't it? The woman was in her late 90s and was as sharp as a hawk, with a delightful sense of humour. I do remember that. She had me in stitches all evening that night.
Well, as you know, Aunt Jane, Clara's grandmother Maddie lived in the house with the Phillips family. I'd always see her when I went to stay with Clara. When she was gone, the house seemed melancholic, if you know what I mean. As if something was missing. Without her lively presence around, that is. I really liked Maddie a lot. She had such a bubbly personality, and with her gone, the house seemed vacuously forlorn, almost lost, if you know what I mean, as if it was struggling to find its new identity.
Well, there you go then, love. Now you understand exactly what I'm talking about. You see, Juvena, everything has energy. Even inanimate objects like a table do. Let's just say houses definitely have energy. And it's the people that live in the houses that give it an identity, as houses are extensions of ourselves. Well, let me get on with my story, shall I?
Please do, Aunt Jane.
Well, I was feeling very miserable living here at the Torvals. The place was really getting to me. I was in a great amount of despair. So I was about to put this place on the market, and I was in any given moment going to contact the estate agents. But the next-door neighbour, who lives near me, opposite the wood-grove, well, her name is Marjorie. Now, she's a very lovely lady. I'm sure you and Lankin will both meet her soon enough, because she's bound to pop around with some of her delicious homemade treats. I told her you were going to be staying with me shortly. She can't wait to meet the both of you. Well, she was the salient one whom suggested to me at the time that I got the Torvals blessed by a priest. I wasn't sure if it would work, but it seemed like a good idea.
But I don't understand, Aunt Jane. I thought houses were only blessed by priests if there was demonic activity in a place.
Not necessarily, love. You've got that wrong. Anyone can have their house blessed. And some people, when they move into a new place, they do just that, in case there's any negative energy lurking around. And in my opinion, it's not a bad idea, if a house has enjoyed a rather dark history. I was sceptical when she made this suggestion, but I was at the end of my rope and was willing to try anything. You see, I didn't really want to sell the Torvals, which was the name of this property, as you know. James Torval named his house after him and his wife, hence the name the Torvals. Anyway, Marjorie arranged for Father Reese Bonoski from our church to bless my home. He said he could pick up the very doleful energy of Anna Torval herself here in the house.
He said that? I asked, looking confounded. Are you saying that Anna's ghost was in this house?
Well, I don't exactly know about that, Juvena. The word ghost sounds so literal, doesn't it? Let's just say that the father felt her energy was very much around. I'd always thought it was James Torval's energy that was around. But no, he picked up on her. When Anna Torval mysteriously disappeared, it had a very disquieting effect on the local community, as you can imagine. It was said that James Torval loved the bones of his wife Anna. Father Reese, who was an amazing clairvoyant, believe it or not, emphatically believed Anna's sad, lugubrious energy was robbing me of my joy. He emphatically believed I felt so miserable because I was picking up on her grief. I could not believe he was telling me all this, as he knew nothing about the house and its history. But it did make a whole lot of sense to me. He believed that maybe if Anna Torval was tragically killed, she wasn't ready to cross over to the other side, as her life had been taken from her far too soon. It was rather bizarre to think that her energy had been hanging around me all this time. The father prayed for Anna Torval, told her to go over to the light, I believe. Then he prayed for the Torvals and threw holy water all over every room in this house. Let me tell you, Juvena, the heaviness lifted at once, and never ever returned, I'm glad to say. After the blessing, the house became mine, so I was able to settle down here happily at the Torvals and put my own signature on the place. Now I would never dream of leaving the Torvals. It has become my beloved home. You may notice the pictures of the trees done in the entrance hall. James Torval left them in the house for me. He said I could keep them because his wife would want them to remain there. Those were Anna's, and he said she wouldn't have wanted them to leave the house. So I've kept them, and I'm very pleased with them. They're very beautiful."
"You mean she painted them herself?"
"She did indeed."
"They're really, really good. She looks like she's a professional artist."
"They're excellent, aren't they? She's very talented, as you can see."
"So do you think it really was Anna Torval's energy hanging around your house that was making you so sad, like Father Reese claimed?" I asked rather sceptically.
"I don't know, Juvenna. All I know is that Father Reese told me he believed Anna Torval had now happily crossed over to the other side. I have to say, in the moment that happened, the place felt so incredibly peaceful. The heaviness lifted. It was like a light had gone on in the house. I don't know anything about the spirit world, Juvenna. I wish I did. Then I would be a lot more insightful. But I'm a novice in all these things, especially things that are supernatural. I'm just telling you my own personal experience. It is what it is. I guess some spirits hang around if they have some unfinished business to attend to. If they don't know they're dead, possibly."
"You really think it's possible to die, Aunt Jane, and to not know you're dead?" I asked, looking at her with a furrowed dip between my eyebrows.
"Yes, I do, as a matter of fact," said Aunt Jane, running a hand through her grey curls, a habit she engaged in when she was deep in thought. "It's a distinct possibility. You see, they say when you die, it's rather like walking from one room into another. So if you're not expecting to die, maybe you wouldn't know you were dead, would you? I don't expect Anna imagined for a single moment when she went for a stroll in the woods that day that this would be the day when she would be mauled by a grizzly bear. You see, Juvenna, energy never dies. That's why I believe we live forever. And these days there is so much evidence to support these claims. All over the world, there are documented accounts, Juvenna dear, of people being brought back from death, being resuscitated, claiming to have left their bodies, and experiencing their senses were 1,000 times sharper, and they felt so much more alive being weightless like that, without being anchored to these heavy, cumbersome bodies of ours."
"So they never found Anna Torval's body, then?" I asked my aunt.
"No, they never did, dear. The police searched the wood grove with a fine tooth comb, of course, but no trace of Anna was ever recovered. The locals believed she'd been killed by a grizzly bear, as there were lots of sightings of bears in the area at the time. And a mother grizzly can be a very dangerous animal, if she thinks her cubs are threatened or in danger. If you're attacked by a black bear, you can fight back to a degree. But with a grizzly, playing dead is the best thing you can possibly do. And if you're attacked by a white bear, a polar bear, well, good luck with that. You probably won't live beyond a second."
"Did they use cadaver dogs," I asked, "to see if they could find her body? Those dogs can pick up the scent of a dead body."
"I don't know, love. That's a very good question you ask. But I'm not sure they did. I don't think they believed anything untoward had happened to Anna in terms of a sinister motive in regards to her death. They believed she was the victim of a grizzly bear."
"So after James Torval sold you the Torvals, where did he go? Did he still remain in Canada?"
"Of course he remained here in Canada, Juvenna. This is his home. Where else would he possibly go?"
said my aunt, in a snappy tone of voice that suggested I'd probably asked a rather stupid question.
"I believe he went to live in Toronto with his brother. I think his brother's name was Paul. Yes, that's right. Paul, I believe it was. I understand James Torval died 8 years ago from kidney failure. My guess is he died of a broken heart. That's always the real reason when you lose a loved one. I mean, he never got over his wife's disappearance, did he? And I'm told his brother would say James would sit there with shoeboxes of letters he and his wife had written each other for years and years, and read through them looking so hopelessly lost. They were childhood sweethearts, you see. So losing the only woman he'd ever loved devastated this poor man."
"That is so tragically sad," I agreed. Imagine not knowing what has become of the woman you loved. There's no closure for you, is there, Aunt Jane? At least if you know how your wife died, and you have a body to bury, you can try to make the best of a bad situation. But not knowing what happened to your wife, that's got to be the worst thing ever. But supposing it wasn't a grizzly bear that killed Anna? I'm sure it was the case, but it might not have been a bear. Something else could have happened to her.
I'm sure it was a bear attack, love, said Aunt Jane. And maybe some wild animals ravaged her body and took it away. But me personally, I don't believe anything sinister was involved in her death. But my next-door neighbour Marjorie begs to differ on this. She has a very different opinion.
So your friend Marjorie thinks that Anna was murdered? Is that what you're saying?
In a manner of speaking, she does, said Aunt Jane. Let's just say Marjorie has her own theories as to what happened to Anna Torval. When she visits you, you can ask her about them if you like. I'm sure she'll be glad to speak about the matter.
I was not sure why I was so interested in the story of Anna Torval, and why she had disappeared so mysteriously in the way she did. But it was the first thing I thought of before I went to bed at night, and the first thing I considered when I woke up in the morning. Even in my dream state, I would actually see a woman with red hair and blue eyes, looking at me in earnest. I had never dreamt of a woman in such detail before, and when I learnt Anna had red hair and blue eyes, it gave me the chills. How could I dream of someone so clearly that I'd never met? But I was sure the woman in my dreams was Anna Torval herself. Was she actually reaching out to me? I couldn't be sure. Once me and my brother Lankham moved in with Aunt Jane, we felt very much at home at the Torvals. Aunt Jane was prudently practical, rather like a sensible headmistress. She always wore tweed skirts, pearls and cashmere cardigans, and only occasionally wore black, navy or white chinos. But no matter where we went, Aunt Jane was spotlessly attired. She was always incredibly kind and had a warm heart. She was much more reserved and private than my mother was, and ran a very well-ordered house, which she had successfully made sumptuously cosy and homely. Where my mother was a bit messy, my aunt was the total opposite in every regard. She was shrewdly organised, sensibly practical, and incredibly efficient. Aunt Jane loved reading, so she had a massive library of books with worn-out bookshelves that reached the ceiling. She had a large sewing room that she devoted to making her dresses for the glamorous boutique in town, where much of the credit for the designer creations could be laid at her door. Aunt Jane also took on private jobs, so occasionally people would pop around to the house to be measured up for a wedding dress or something. Aunt Jane would make them an outfit to measure. She was an extraordinary seamstress, and I could only marvel how nimble she was on a sewing machine. When Aunt Jane was busy with her sewing, I had to keep my 5-year-old brother Lankham fully entertained, so I guess in a way I became his full-time au pair, if you can call me that. I really loved spending this invaluable quality time with my brother, so I didn't care a hoot that I wasn't in attendance at school anymore, even if I was going to have to repeat another year. It had felt as if I was having a marvellous holiday, thoroughly enjoying the glorious views, exquisite idyllic scenery, and crisp, very fresh mountain air. I swear I never slept as well as I did when I was staying at the Torvals. Aunt Jane owned some friendly free-range chickens, all that had their own names from Clucky to Down. She was also the proud owner of 3 very affectionate cats, who at their own time had found Aunt Jane and invited themselves to move in with her, in the presumptuous way that cats so often do. My favourite was a big fat tabby called Dopey, who was far too lazy to go anywhere, but loved to lie lackadaisically on the sofa all day, soaking up the sun. I adored stroking his fur, because he was so squidgy, and he had a purr on him that could rival any car engine. He had the most beautiful white moustache underneath his nose, that made him look like a distinguished gentleman, so I made sure every night that that black cat slept in my arms. Aunt Jane's property was surrounded by alpine fields and exquisite views of the mountains. There was a vast collection of trees on the property that stretched out like a sizable yawn. I was apprehensive about going inside those woods, of course I was, after learning about what had happened to Anna Torval, even though the disappearing incident had happened an awfully long time ago. As strange as it may sound, I really felt as if the grove of woods was actually calling my name, almost as if something within me was drawing me into those trees, and I surmised it was probably my curiosity about Anna Torval's case that was never far from my mind. I resisted the temptation of going into the grove, because my inner angst told me it was probably a bad idea. I think Luncombe felt a similar pulling draw. He would always say he wanted to go and play in the woods, and as far as I was concerned, they looked benign and very inviting. But I couldn't help wondering if me and my brother would mysteriously disappear, like Anna Torval had done all those years ago. Aunt Jane was not remotely concerned about me or my brother Luncombe going exploring in the woods, provided I had some bear spray with me and a whistle that I kept around my neck. If I wanted to go into the woods, all I needed to do was to inform her about it and tell her how long I would be gone for. But I was reticent to go exploring, even though I very much wanted to. It was rather like being pulled both ways. I'm scared to go and play in the woods, Aunt Jane, after what happened to Anna Torval. What if me and Luncombe were to go missing in there? I wouldn't worry at all about what happened to poor Anna Torval all those years ago, said Aunt Jane, very kindly, giving me an encouraging smile. That woman disappeared a long time ago, and I guess she was at the wrong place at the wrong time when tragedy invariably struck. It happens that way sometimes, and we don't know what really happened to her, do we? Her disappearance will always remain a mystery. Let's just say, Juvenna, Canada is a very large wilderness. People from all over the world come here every year to ambitiously explore the Rocky Mountains. And most of them, I'm very glad to say, return safe and well to their countries, or the states in which they live in. And they are fine. No problems at all. Let me tell you something, Juvenna. I go through those woods all the time to take a shortcut to the neighbour's house to visit my good friend Marjorie, who lives there. Nothing untoward has ever happened to me, nor have I ever felt afraid in those woods. I did scare off a couple of nervous black bears once, of course, but they were more scared of me than I was of them, and they certainly didn't try to attack me. It's the grizzlies you need to worry about. If you take bear spray with you, I'm sure you will be absolutely fine. But I don't want you wandering off too far. You need to have your wits about you when you're rambling around the wilderness. But everybody knows that. You must remember that this vast Canadian wilderness, spread out before us, is home to a plethora of indigenous wildlife. But you don't need me to tell you that, for you've seen many animals since you've been here, haven't you, Juvenna? I sure have, Aunt Jane.
Well, there you go, then. You're a sensible girl, Juvenna, with a shrewd head on your wise little shoulders. You'll be perfectly safe in the wilderness. I can assure you of that. But I'm very glad you're being cautious, nevertheless. I mean, if Anna Torval had been cautious on the day she sauntered off into the woods and subsequently vanished, maybe her story would not have ended so tragically.
You really believe the woods are safe, do you, Aunt Jane? I asked.
Look, Juvenna, is the New York subway safe? Or even crossing a road or taking a hike? Everything in life has risks, does it not? But if you apply common sense in crossing the road with care, you won't get run over, will you? Unless you're extremely unlucky, of course. It's the same with frolicking around in the woods. You need to be fully aware of your environment, and then you will be fine. If the woods become very quiet, that's a warning sign for you to leave at once. So follow your gut instincts, and they will guide you better than any compass can.
I realised my Aunt Jane had made some invaluable points, and she was absolutely right on the money when she said hundreds of people came to the Canadian Rockies every single year, leaving in one piece, without being mauled by a grizzly bear, or disappearing off the face of the planet, never to be seen again. Yes, of course, there were disappearances all over the American continent every year, most especially in places like Alaska. But you couldn't live your life in fear, could you? Or you'd end up not living it at all. Maybe I was my own worst enemy, building up Herculean obstacles in my own mind to prevent me from fully appreciating the adventurous opportunities the Canadian Rockies so happily provided all its intrepid adventure seekers. I would be an absolute fool to allow fear to rob me of enjoying Aunt Jane's place to the fullest, because I knew I was extremely lucky to be here. As Aunt Jane had promised, she brought my brother Luncombe a fabulous supply of paints, crayons and drawing paper, so he could thoroughly enjoy spending much of his time drawing or painting to his heart's content. It was easy to keep Luncombe entertained for hours on end, as unlike other children his own age, he never got bored when it came to drawing or painting. I would make sure that every single afternoon my little brother would take a long nap in his bedroom, and in that wonderful time that I had to myself, I would do my own thing, like reading a book or industriously rustling up something in Aunt Jane's kitchen, like baking a cake or some cookies that we'd have for tea later. By all accounts, my mother was doing remarkably well at home and making a speedy recovery from her stroke, so I knew I was going to make the most of spending this time with Aunt Jane and getting to know her even better. Aunt Jane was very good friends with the couple that lived on the neighbouring plot of land. One morning, a very battered-looking green Range Rover rattled precariously down our driveway, making quite a thunderous commotion on its approach. So the silence of the Rocky Mountains was rudely disturbed with the clattering sound of the Rover. Finally it came to a standstill. I'm not sure if it was run on a diesel engine or not, but that car was a hell of a noisy. I was standing on the wraparound porch at the time, watching over my little brother, who was happily sitting at the Adirondack table, drawing a picture with some crayons. He was fully absorbed by the exercise, but even he curiously looked towards the driveway when he heard the clanging car making its approach. "Someone's come to visit Aunt Jane," he said. I affectionately rubbed my hand through Luncombe's wavy blonde curls and chuckled. "Yes, someone's come to visit Aunt Jane. It's a bit early in the morning for visitors, don't you think, Luncombe?" My brother stopped drawing and looked at the car more closely. "That is such a noisy car. Is there something wrong with the engine on it?" he asked me. "Why does it rattle so much?" "I'm not sure, Luncombe," I said. "I don't know anything about cars, but certainly if I were the driver, I would take it in for a check-up." "You mean to a car doctor?" asked Luncombe, chuckling at the very idea. "That's right, a car doctor. Maybe the car is suffering from stiff joints and has got a touch of arthritis. Maybe it's got a fever or a very bad cold, perhaps." At that my brother giggled. He rather liked the idea of a car struck down with arthritis, a high fever, or a very bad cold. Me and my brother Luncombe watched inquisitively from the porch, as the occupant in the car appeared to be taking an awfully long time in getting out of the vehicle, as if he or she was rather hesitant to do so. Finally the car door swung open. I observed a petite woman, probably over 4 foot tall, with a shock of wild white hair that looked as if it couldn't be tamed unless you held it down with a formidable hair gel. The woman casually climbed out of the car and began to look directly at the Torvalls. "That lady is very short," said Luncombe. "Her hair is as white as a fluffy cloud." I wasn't sure how old the woman was, but even from the distance her face was heavily lined so that her brown bird-like eyes were buried beneath the folds of her wrinkles. I suspected this woman spent an awful lot of her time out of doors. Her skin was probably weathered from extremes of temperature, from hot to cold. She could have been anywhere between 40 and 70, I decided. The woman was dressed very young and trendy, but then again it occurred to me that maybe she had to buy her clothes from the children's section at the boutique. She was wearing a pair of shocking bright pink leggings and a matching pale pink sweater. Although I wouldn't say she was unduly feminine, she probably pretty much liked the colour pink, like I did. We both unhesitantly abandoned the porch and hurried towards the mysterious stranger. We were never bashful towards strangers, my brother and I, and always liked to meet new people. The friendly woman greeted us both warmly, and didn't seem remotely surprised to see 2 youngsters at Aunt Jane's. She clearly knew why we were here, so I deduced Aunt Jane must have told her about us. Could this be her next-door neighbour Marjorie she'd talked about, who had a different opinion on what happened to Jane Torval? If that was indeed the case, I was looking forward to hearing her opinion on the matter. "Goodness gracious me! It is so delightful to meet the both of you," she said, looking at us appraisingly.
Now I need to get to the trunk. I've got some nice little surprises for you back there." We watched the woman walking over to the trunk of her car and removing a basket of yummy-looking goodies that had been so perfectly packed together. They looked like they'd come from a refined, very upmarket delicatessens that was clearly focused on doing home deliveries. I was to discover she'd baked all this stuff herself. "Your Aunt Jane told me about her favourite niece and nephew, so I thought I must pop around to say hello to you both. I do hope you both like fudge."
"We are Aunt Jane's only niece and nephew," I said. "She only has one sister." "But you brought fudge?" I asked, looking at this lady as if she was the fairy godmother from Cinderella, because fudge was my absolute favourite sweet in the entire world, and Lankum similarly loved fudge, almost as much as I did. I had tried to make fudge over the years at home, when I'd become overcome with a sweet tooth, and in our house there was always sugar, condensed milk and butter available in our pantry, so fudge was a go-to sweet treat I would always consider making. Sometimes my feeble, rather beleaguered, half-hearted attempts to make fudge had turned it into toffee. "You make fudge!" said Lankum, looking at the lady in absolute delight. "I love fudge, so does Juvenna. It's the best sweet in the whole wide world. Juvenna sometimes makes fudge, but it doesn't always work out properly." The woman smiled. "Fudge can be tricky to make, but once you get the hang of it, it's pretty plain sailing, you know. I bought you both fudge. I made vanilla and chocolate. Then I made some blueberry and apple pie, some chocolate chip cookies, and some of my fresh apple fritters to welcome you both to Canada. I've also made mac and cheese and some miniature chicken pies on the savoury side of things, as they are all specialities of mine. I've bought you some maple syrup as well, the finest you can get from these parts, to have with your pancakes in the morning. Very delicious served with crispy bacon, you know. And this is the finest maple syrup you can get in these parts. Your aunt tells me this is your first visit to Canada, so I wanted to make you both feel very warmly welcome." "You bought all this stuff especially for us?" I said, looking at the kind lady in amazement. "That's so very kind of you. I don't know what to say." "It's an absolute pleasure, love," said the woman, smiling warmly at me. "I live next door to your property. I usually take a shortcut through the woods to come and see your Aunt Jane. I decided to bring the car over today, as I need to go to town later." The woman pointed towards the woods. "My house fringes the edge of the woods over there. It's the dividing line between your aunt's property and mine. There's a trail in the woods with an arrow pointing to the willows. If you follow that path, it leads directly to my house. But you do need to stick to the trail, and then it's very easy to find my property, which is called the Willows, probably because it overlooks a creek with lots of old willow trees that bend over the water like decrepit old men, looking for a penny that they've invariably dropped." At this expression I laughed, as I imagined all the slumped old willow trees bending down over the water, desperately hoping to find a lost coin, and the imagery made me smile. I decided at once I very much liked this eccentric woman. "Willow trees are my absolute favourite," I said. "I know what you mean about that. I like them too. Believe me, there is so much bird life going on in those willow trees. It's an ecosystem all of its own. Last year in autumn, would you believe some birds were still making their nests in those branches? But then the weather has been uncharacteristically warm of late. You should come and visit me for tea sometime. Just follow the trail and you will find my house soon enough. I do enjoy receiving visitors, and you are both welcome to come and see me. My husband Malcolm would love to meet the both of you. Maybe he'll even take you out on a hike or a spot of fishing sometime. My name is Marjorie Brenner, by the way. And you are?" "My name is Juvenna. My brother's name is Lankum." The woman looked delighted to hear our names. "Dearie me! What lovely, lovely names! So incredibly unique, if you don't mind my saying so. Believe it or not, I used to use Juvenna's skincare products on my face. Very good they were, too.
My skin looked remarkably good when I was using it. I was very keen on the Lancome mascara as well. Lancome makes the very best mascara in the world. You do both realize you're the owners of names of exclusive cosmetic houses. I wouldn't mind being named after a cosmetic house myself. I quite fancy a name like Maybelline, Guerlain, Gatineau, or even Dior. Pretty special if you ask me. Do you know why your mother called you such fabulously original names?
Well, my mother told me she didn't know what on earth to call me when she learnt I was going to be a girl, I told Marjorie. She was thinking of calling me Sapphire, but then as she was putting on her moisturiser one night before returning to bed, she glanced down at the pot of cream she was applying to her skin and saw the name Juvena on the label and thought the name was perfect for a girl, so she called me that. I think she called my brother Lancome because she had called me after a skincare house, so why not my brother as well? I expect she thought Lancome sounded more masculine. I guess that was her thinking at the time.
Why not, indeed? What a lovely story.
Marjorie handed me the basket of goodies.
You can take that into the house, will you, Juvena? I've got a slight ache to this right arm of mine.
Glad to do so, I said, taking the basket from her. Seconds later, Aunt Jane emerged from the house. She sashayed towards us with a warm smile on her face.
Marjorie, my dear, how good it is to see you. I was wondering when you were going to grace us with your presence. The children are looking forward to meeting you, and now they have. So you've just met my niece and nephew, I see.
She said, her eyes dancing as she threw her arms affectionately around Marjorie to embrace her with a warm hug.
This, Marjorie, is my beloved niece Juvena, said Aunt Jane, pointing towards me. I know, she just introduced herself to me, said Marjorie, giving me a wink. And I very much like the name Juvena. I was just telling your niece here that she's named after a very distinguished cosmetic house. I didn't know that. I had no idea that Juvena was the name of a cosmetic house. My sister never told me that. It just goes to show you learn something new every day. Now, children, I want to introduce you to my lovely next-door neighbour, Marjorie. Remember I was telling you all about her, Juvena. Did I not tell you she'd pop around? She lives through those woods over there, at a house called the Willows. You definitely must go and see her sometime. I know she's come over here today to bring you some of her world-famous homemade fudge.
I love fudge, Aunt Jane. It's my favourite sweet of all time.
Well, then you're in for quite the treat. Honestly, Marjorie, you are the end, said Aunt Jane with a twinkle in her eyes. Let me tell you, children, Marjorie here is an incredible cook. And if you love fudge as much as you say you do, Juvena, let me tell you, you're going to be very happy. Let's just say I've never eaten more delicious fudge than the fudge that Marjorie makes. It quite literally melts in the mouth. It was my mother's favourite recipe, said Marjorie. She got the recipe from Anna Torval, who was married to James Torval, the original owner of your house. If you remember, Jane, Aunt Torval went missing in those woods over there, said Marjorie, pointing to the large gathering of trees in the distance. Goodness gracious, said Aunt Jane. You mean to tell me the fudge you make is actually Anna Torval's recipe? I had absolutely no idea. Me and Juvena were only talking about her disappearance the other day, weren't we, Juvena?
That's right, I said.
It's her recipe, said Marjorie proudly. I've still got the paper it's written on, in her beautiful curly writing.
Aunt Jane says you've got a different theory about what happened to Anna Torval. I'd love to hear it if you don't mind.
Juvena here, said my aunt proudly, would like to become an investigative journalist one day, and wants to get a Bachelor of Journalism when she goes to college. So you must forgive her if she assaults you with all these questions, Marjorie. Since she's been here, she's talked about little else beyond what happened to Anna Torval. She's even had dreams about the woman at night, haven't you, Juvena?
I have, I said, and I don't even normally remember my dreams, so it's very weird.
How extraordinary that you should be dreaming of the woman, said Marjorie, looking extremely intrigued. I admit it's a tragic story, but I did know her. The Willows was my parents' house, you see. My mother was very good friends with Anna Torval. She was pretty much a fixture and fitting in our lives, you know. She was very close to my mother, you see. A lovely lady she was, too. She had beautiful auburn hair, porcelain skin, and blue eyes. A very striking woman she was. An excellent cook and artist as well. Let's just say her oils on canvas were absolutely superb. And I'm sure, Juvenna, that your aunt has shown you some of her oil paintings of the trees and the mountains she painted in the hallway. That will give you an idea of what an extraordinary artist she actually was.
Yes, I've seen them. I particularly love the one of the blossoming magnolia tree, set against the mountains and the pink sky.
That's my favourite picture too, said Marjorie approvingly. I love the way Anna picked up the blossoms so perfectly. And I have a big fixation on the colour pink, you see, she said, pointing to her clothes.
I wanted to ask Marjorie more about Anna Torval, but my aunt beckoned everybody into the house, and I lost my train of thought, especially with the distraction of the warm smell of Marjorie's blueberry and apple pie that kept teasing my nose and causing my stomach to rumble very hungrily.
Goodness gracious me, where are my manners? Said Aunt Jane apologetically. Don't just stand there, Marjorie. I hope you're going to grace us with your presence and join us for a cup of tea, especially since you've brought us such a feast. I tell you what I will do. I will put some warm blueberry and apple pie onto 4 plates, and I'll serve it up with plenty of cream. The kids need to try this pie of yours. It's absolutely heavenly. How can I refuse? Said Marjorie, looking extremely grateful. I'm quite parched myself, so a cup of tea will go down very nicely. She bent down to give Lankum a hug. I've heard all about you, Lankum. I understand you very much love art. Your Aunt Jane tells me you're quite the artist.
I'm going to be like Picasso one day. I like to draw and paint and play with papier-mâché, said Lankum proudly. I've been drawing pictures on the table on the porch. Would you like to see them? I can show you if you like.
Well, I'd love to see them very much, said Marjorie, taking my brother's hand in hers. She was clearly good with children. Why don't you show me what you've drawn, Lankum? Lankum looked terribly pleased. He had a contented expression on his little face. He led Marjorie to the porch very eagerly. I hate to say this, but I hadn't been observing any of the pictures my brother had drawn. I hate to admit, every time he drew a picture, I would only briefly glance at it and say, "That's nice, Lankum," like you do with about as much boredom as you experience when you watch paint dry. Lankum would wear an irritated frown on his face.
But you don't even look at my picture. How do you know it's nice if you don't even look at it, Juvenna?
Because I would say, in my quick defence, everything you draw is nice, Lankum. I don't have to look at your picture to know it's absolutely great. Lankum would roll his eyes at the back of his head and say, "Whatever." So with Marjorie expressing a keen interest to see his work, I dare say he thought all his Christmases had come at once. "I tell you what I will do," said Aunt Jane. "Marjorie, you stay here with the children. Sit at the table and make yourself comfortable on the porch. I will go and get the tea ready, and we'll bring it outside for us all to enjoy. The weather is so beautiful today. We might as well make the most of it and enjoy it. You stay with the kids. I can see they're eager to get to know you, Marjorie." Marjorie was bending over to examine my brother's artwork, and judging by the enchanted expression on her face, she was very impressed with the quality of my brother's work. "You drew this yourself, Lankum. You're a very clever boy. I can see that." Lankum nodded proudly.
"Do you like my picture, Marjorie?"
he asked, looking chuffed. "Well, I really do," said Marjorie. "I can't believe you're only 5 years old, and you draw like this, Lankum. You're very, very good. I couldn't draw like this when I was your age, you know. But mind you, I can't even draw now. Everything I draw is like a squiggle on a page." At this, Lankum giggled, and then he said earnestly,
"I want to be an artist one day. My teacher at nursery says my pictures are much better than the other boys and girls my age.
She says that I've got a very special gift. Your teacher's absolutely right, Lankum. I couldn't have put it better myself. You are very gifted indeed. With work like this, I think you're going to be a fine artist one day. Just like Anna Torval was. She pointed at the characters on the picture to affirm their identities with Lankum. I see you've drawn your aunt's house, the Torvals, over there. Those are the mountains in the background, and all the trees of the wood grove. You've got 3 cats there in the grass, haven't you? So your Aunt Jane's cats have been included in your picture, I see. And also some of her chickens. Then there are 4 people in the picture. Let's see. One looks rather like Juvena. The other is your Aunt Jane. And who's that person over there? That's me, said Lankum proudly. Can you not see? I'm the smallest in the picture. But who's the lady in the picture with the red hair? Asked Marjorie. That's my friend Anna. Your friend Anna, said Marjorie. How interesting. But you don't have a friend called Anna, I said, looking at my brother incredulously, with a perplexed expression on my face. I was used to my brother drawing the things that he saw around him, and not just pictures of strangers. I began to wonder if our move to Canada had made my brother Lankum make up a fictitious friend. I'd recently seen him talking to someone that wasn't actually there, and I'd heard him chatting away garrulously and giggling in his bedroom when he was supposed to be enjoying his afternoon nap. I had thought nothing of it at the time. He was 5 years old, and kids of that same age did like playing make-believe. But I have to admit Lankum had not exhibited such idiosyncratic behaviour before, until we'd moved into the Torvals with Aunt Jane. Aunt Jane had even said to me recently, I didn't know little Lankum had an invisible friend. I saw him on the swing set the other day, talking to someone, and no one was there. I hadn't given Lankum's absurd behaviour of late much heed, for 5-year-old children tend to have wild imaginations and seem to thoroughly enjoy living in a fanciful world of their own creation. I know I did much the same when I was 5. I would pretend to be Alice in Wonderland. I owned a pair of sparkling red slippers and would pretend to be dancing down a yellow-bricked road. I will admit I did feel slightly affronted. I thought I'd been enough entertainment for my brother, but obviously not. Maybe not being at nursery any more, with boys and girls of a similar age to him, he now felt the need to recreate more friends, to compensate for being around adults all the time. You heard about this happening an awful lot, in children who didn't have brothers and sisters to play with. To all intents and purposes, in Lankum's case, there was a sizable age difference between the 2 of us, so I suspect I was more like a maternal figure in his life, rather than just a sibling. Anna's my friend, he said proudly. She used to live in this house. She's very nice. She comes to visit me when I take my afternoon nap. I turned to Marjorie to explain what I thought was going on. I think Lankum over here overheard me talking to Aunt Jane about Anna Torval, and has decided to include her in his pictures. I've been talking about the subject an awful lot, you see. I'm intrigued about why she disappeared all those years ago like she did. I love mysteries of any kind. That's why I want to become a journalist. Anna Torval did live here, my brother repeated insistently, screwing up his eyes at me. Exactly right, I said. She did live here. But I've been talking about her a lot, haven't I, Lankum? No wonder you've decided to include her in your pictures, I said kindly. Marjorie intervened, giving my brother a warm, encouraging smile. I'm very sure that Anna Torval would be absolutely delighted that you thought of her and included her in your pictures, Lankum. I know she loved children. She was unable to have any of her own, you know. She would have loved you so much, Lankum, sharing a common interest with her such as art. Anna loved to paint and draw like you do. You're right, Lankum, she did live in this house. She was married to a very handsome man, you know, called James Torval. He was the one that built this beautiful house of Aunt Jane's, with his own loving hands. Have you noticed the attention to detail around this place? She asked, turning to me. I nodded. Yes, I have seen the details. They're amazing.
Aunt Jane says a person only spends money on a place if they intend to stay there for good. But James Torval didn't know that his life would be cut short living here, when his wife just disappeared like that. It's such a sad story.
Your aunt is absolutely right about that. The Torvals certainly put their mark on this place. I know when your Aunt Jane moved in here, she very nearly sold the Torvals, because she could feel the heaviness of the place. She thought this house, well, in this house I mean, that she was picking up the energy of James Torval, hopelessly depressed energy, if you know what I mean, after his wife's disappearance. I was the one that told your aunt to get the house blessed. When Father Reese blessed this house, he picked up on the energy of Anna Torval, would you believe? And once he blessed the place, the energy lifted almost at once. I was terribly pleased when that happened, because your Aunt Jane chose to stay here for good, and never ever looked back. And since then, she and I have become the greatest of friends. I couldn't imagine her not being my next-door neighbour anymore.
So did you know the Torvals? I asked. Did you get to meet Anna Torval yourself before she vanished?
Marjorie chuckled. Your aunt's right about you. You're going to be quite some journalist one day, Juvena. You do ask an awful lot of questions, and you need an inquiring mind to become an accomplished journalist for sure.
I guess I do ask lots of questions, but I'm really fascinated by this case. I really want to know what happened to Anna Torval.
If you must know, Juvena, I did know Anna Torval, but as I was saying to you earlier, she was closer friends with my mother. They both shared a passion for art, cooking, and photography. Anna was a frequent visitor to our house. My mother and her were always exchanging recipes together. So the fudge recipe is hers, and then it soon became my mother's, and it became her go-to favourite recipe for fudge, and now it's mine.
So what do you think happened with Anna Torval? Do you think she was killed by a grizzly like the police believed?
Absolutely not, said Marjorie. I think James Torval had something to do with his wife's death. I never told anyone about my feelings on this matter at the time, least of all the police. But you know Aunt Jane. Well, she knows my story.
You think James Torval was behind his wife's death? But how can that be? He idolised her, didn't he? So why would he want to harm her, if he loved her so much?
It's true, Juvena. James did idolise Anna very much. That might have been part of the problem. He put her on a pedestal, you see. You should never do that with another human being, because we're all desperately flawed, are we not? No one is ever perfect. I know the couple had a very happy marriage together, but Anna was nursing a rather dark secret, I'm afraid. It was a secret that she'd shared with my mother, which I believe contributed greatly to her disappearance.
A secret, I said. I certainly liked the sound of this. This was why I asked so many questions. Life was so much more exhilarating when you made inquiries. You could connect the dots together soon and make sense of things. As far as I was concerned, the story connected to the enigmatic vanishing of Anna Torval was getting very intriguing indeed, and for some reason I couldn't get enough about learning about the subject. My interest had clearly rubbed off on Lankham as well, for he was now drawing pictures of the dead woman. Marjorie's face went as pink as a peony. She looked a tad embarrassed to tell us about this secret, but she did so regardless. I realised her embarrassment was due to eavesdropping in on a conversation that was no business of hers at the time, but I couldn't blame her for doing that. Much like Marjorie, if I'd overheard a conversation like that, I would have found it very difficult to turn away.
As I was saying, without wishing to sound like a broken record, it was common for Anna Torval to visit my mother at the house. They were extremely close, the two of them. They both shared a passion for cooking, so they had a great deal in common. Sometimes they would cook together in my mother's kitchen, to make stuff for fêtes, things like that. I was so used to seeing Anna around and about. So she was very common in our lives. One morning, it was probably about 11 o'clock. My mother and Anna were cooking together. I think they were making cheese soufflés in the kitchen. They were determined to get them absolutely right. because making cheese soufflés can be a tricky business, you know. They had promised me that I could have some cheese soufflé when it was fully baked, and I adored cheese of any kind. I could smell the delicious aroma of melted cheese. That got my stomach rumbling and drew me straight to the kitchen. It was on my approach to the kitchen that I overheard the two women talking together. I guess I shouldn't have eavesdropped in the way I did, but Anna sounded so desperately upset. I guess my curiosity was piqued. So instead of walking away, as I should have done, I stood at the door and listened in. Now, I'm not proud of myself for that.
What was Anna saying to your mother? I asked.
What's troubling you, Anna? My mother was asking her. Something's very heavy on your mind. Is that why you wanted to make something airy and light like soufflé today? To lighten your mood, so to speak? If you don't mind my saying so, Anna, you don't look quite like yourself today. I've known you for many years, and something was off about you the moment you walked through that kitchen door, with such a hang-dog expression on your face.
Is it that obvious?
Of course it's obvious, Anna. Blindingly so. You're one of my most precious friends, and there's nothing you cannot tell me. I hope you know that. You never know, you might feel relieved to get whatever is ailing you off your chest. And believe it or not, I'm an excellent listener, even if I say so myself.
I'm being blackmailed, Dorothy. That's what's going on, which is why I'm in such a dreadful state. I don't know who's doing this to me, but I can't get a wink of sleep at night. I'm terribly afraid of things going completely pear-shaped in my life. I wake up every morning in quite the sweat. Even James has been asking me what's going on with me. But if I tell him my secret, I'm so worried about how he might react. James thinks I'm perfect. I so wish I was. If he knew what I'd done, I'm not sure he'd be able to forgive me.
You're being blackmailed, came my mother's appalled voice. You're kidding me. Who would do such a dreadfully unkind thing to you?
I have no idea, Dorothy. I wish I could answer that question myself. Someone is sending me threatening notes in the post. The postal stamps are all local, so it's got to be someone that's living in this area that knows me well. And worst of all, they know my secret. They're posting me threats. Can you believe that?
No, I can't. It sounds like something out of an Alfred Hitchcock movie. How absolutely dreadful. You poor, poor thing. I can't imagine what you're going through.
You have no idea, Dorothy. You have no idea what it's like to be me at the moment. I'm literally walking on eggshells, always looking over my shoulders in case someone is watching me. The first note that came to me, in the post box, was done on white paper with the letters cut out from a magazine. It said,
I know what you did, and if you don't pay up, I will tell your husband James your dirty little secret, and he will know what a slut you really are.
Oh, he said that? My God, the man called you a slut? You've got to be kidding me. That's pretty heavy. I'm not kidding, Dorothy. Do I look like I'm kidding?
No, you don't. Your face has gone as white as a sheet. I've never seen you look more flustered.
I was so scared, Dorothy. Let me tell you, you have no idea. Look at me. I'm shaking like a leaf, just thinking about it.
Are you sure you don't want a tot of brandy, Anna, before you continue with all this? It might calm your nerves.
No, I'll be absolutely all right. I don't think turning to alcohol's going to help me in any way. I'll just end up getting a headache.
Fair enough. So tell me, Anna, what did this blackmailer's note actually say to you? It threatened you, obviously, but did it demand money from you?
Of course it demanded money from me. The note told me to leave a hefty amount of cash in a plastic bag under a tree where 3 pink balloons would be hanging on the branches. You know the tree I'm talking about. The crooked dogwood on the Greenvale Road. It's very, very distinctive, opposite the Donahue property.
Oh, yes, you're right about that. I know that crooked tree very well. It is a very distinctive landmark, like you say. You can't possibly miss it. But what I don't understand, Anna, is why are you being blackmailed? Who on earth would want to do that to you? And more to the point, what on earth for?
I don't know who they are. I wish I did. But they're threatening to tell my secret if I don't pay them a lot of money. The worst part of all in this sorry saga, Dorothy, is they sent me copies of photographs. Can you believe that? Photographs that they took of me in a very compromising position. I had been married to James for 3 years back then. It happened a long, long time ago. They tell me they're going to pass on these incriminating photographs to James himself if I don't give them the money immediately. The first time they did this to me, I paid them money, but now they've got greedy and they want more. And if I keep cashing money like this, handing them large cash outs from James's account, he's going to know something is amiss.
You mean you've already paid this blackmailer before? Are you absolutely insane, Anna? You don't do something like this. You should go to the police at once.
Are you kidding me? I can't go to the police about this. Let's just say I thought if I paid whoever is blackmailing me off, that the problem would just go away. But as I said, the blackmailer is greedy. He's asking for more and more money. I feel as if I've got on a merry-go-round, Dorothy, and the ride is never going to stop. What am I going to do, Dorothy? I've got myself entangled in such a mess that I can't get out of.
You must not pay the blackmailer another penny, Anna. You hear me? Don't you dare be manipulated like this. You do realize if you pay this blackmailer again, he or she will keep coming back for more money until there is nothing left in your checking account. And you can't have that. This blackmailer is taking full advantage of your vulnerability, Anna. You can't let him do this to you. Whatever happened 3 years after you were married to James, you need to tell him about it. I'm sure he will understand. There is nothing you've done that could be that bad that he can't forgive you for it. We've all done things in our lives, have we not, that we're not terribly proud of. But when you're in a marriage, you have to learn to forgive your spouse. My husband, for example, one night he came home, very late, stinking of booze. He had lipstick marks all over his shirt. The following morning, when I questioned him about it, he was very sheepish. Some woman in the bar had smothered him with wet kisses, and he admitted he had rather enjoyed the attention he'd received from her. He said it made him feel that he was still attractive to the opposite sex. It made me realize I needed to give my husband more attention so he wouldn't be looking for validation elsewhere.
Yes, but what happened with him was innocent. It didn't go beyond a couple of slobbery kisses from another woman, so that's easy to forgive. My case is completely different, isn't it? Suffice to say, I know James is not going to understand any of this. That's the big problem. He'll never ever forgive me, Dorothy. And even though James loves the bones of me, if he thinks for a single second I betrayed his trust, there is no telling what he will do, even if it happened a long time ago, which it did. James has very strong views on fidelity, and if they're breached, he might just lose it with me, Dorothy, and I mean really lose it.
What is this secret you've been keeping from him? Or don't you want to tell me? I will completely understand if you don't. But it might help to tell me about it and get it off your chest. I can give you an honest opinion on the matter. By the sounds of things, and reading between the lines, are you telling me you were unfaithful to James?
That's exactly what I'm saying, Dorothy. I'm not proud of myself, of course I am not. I never intended to cheat on him, and I know it sounds so haplessly lame, but it just happened. And if I say that to James, God knows how he's going to react. I'm actually trembling in my boots just thinking about it. Don't get me wrong. James does not get angry, but this will awaken the lion inside him. Let me tell you it will.
When did this happen, Anna? You said it was 3 years into your marriage. I didn't think you would have found an opportunity to be unfaithful to James. I mean, he works from home, does he not? You're both practically joined at the hip.
It happened a long time ago, 3 years into our marriage exactly. Oh, one night I just got so tiddly at Rodden Morrison's party. I think there was over 150 guests there. You were there too, Marjorie, don't you remember?
Oh, of course I remember that party. But I barely saw you that night. You were in the kitchen for a short while chatting with all the girls. It was a tight squeeze in that very large kitchen, so many of us together. I seem to remember you slipping off to the ladies, and then you failed to return. I thought you had gone off to join the men, to be with James. They were all gathered in the front yard, if you remember, around the fire pit and the barbecue. They were all taking care of the lamb on the spit and the chicken wings and so forth. The smells were delicious. But let's just say the men that night well outnumbered the women. I think Rhonda had more male friends than female friends, didn't she? If ever I saw a tomboy, it was Rhonda Morrison. I think she'd have been happy to have been born a man. She worked with men all the time, didn't she? In the mechanic shop, and was always wearing overalls and covered in grease and dirt, making no secret of the fact that she preferred men over women. She said women were bitchy and competitive, didn't she? But men accepted you exactly as you are, and were not quick to judge and condemn.
Well, she makes a good point there, doesn't she? She's not wrong. Men are never bitchy. It's women you need to watch. They can tear you apart limb from limb with their cruel words.
Well, all things considered, Anna, dear, and taking that into account, do you possibly think your blackmailer might be a woman? Have you considered that? We keep referring to the blackmailer as a him, but it may well be a her, so to speak.
I think it may possibly be a her, said Anna, but of course I can't prove a single thing, can I? But I don't think a man would blackmail me like this. But Susan Harris and Renee Kitterson, they could be doing this to me. They were both at that party. Those two are absolute bitches, and I know Renee was always jealous of my relationship with James, so I wouldn't put it past her to do this to me.
So what exactly did happen at Rhonda Morrison's party, Anna? I need you to tell me everything, so I can make sense of what you're telling me.
Well, I was in the kitchen, wasn't I, with all of the girls. If you remember, we were knocking back stiff punch. It was lethal stuff, let me tell you. But you were there, so you remember all that. I think Rhonda put enough alcohol in that punch to knock out an entire elephant. I was knocking it back as if it was orange juice. I had no idea it had so much alcohol in it.
The punch was lethal, I will admit that. I think most people left Rhonda Morrison's party half-cut. I threw up violently myself after that party, waking up with a hangover from hell.
So you know what it's like when you get so drunk?
Of course I know what it's like getting drunk, Anna. People get drunk at parties all the time, do they not? It's hardly the crime of the century, provided, of course, you don't drive when you're drunk. We've all been there, done it, and got the T-shirt.
Well, as you know, I excused myself for a bathroom break, and I did go to the ladies to relieve myself after all that punch, but then I decided to discreetly go off out of doors to have a smoke.
But I thought you'd given up cigarettes years ago. You quit the habit when you married James, did you not?
I had given up cigarettes, but sometimes after a few drinks, I'm gagging for one. You know what it's like.
My goodness gracious me. James would have probably done his nut if he'd known you were smoking, Anna. He doesn't half harp on about the dangers of cigarette smoking.
Exactly. James hates smoking, so I didn't want him to catch me in the act, being so naughty, if you know what I mean. So I needed to make absolutely sure no one saw me when I left the house and slunk into the backyard. I could hear the background noises of drunk people having a great time, the smell of lamb on the spit and all the barbecue. My biggest mistake was I didn't eat any of the snacks that were being offered around, so that punch went straight to my head. The Morrisons' property, as you know, Dorothy, is huge, with lots of trees around it, much like here. It was such a prepossessing night, with the stars shining so brightly in the sky, and there was almost a full moon. That was when Julius came up to me.
Julius who, Anna?
Don't tell me you've forgotten Julius, Dorothy. You remember Julius Davies. He no longer lives in Canada. He moved to Minnesota, I believe, a long time ago. But that man could charm the shell of a tortoise, let me tell you. He would look at a woman, and she'd practically crumble in his arms.
Oh, yes, I remember Julius. All the women in town had a dreadful crush on the man. He was terribly good-looking back then, wasn't he? Turning heads wherever he went. He had film star-like looks, did he not? But he certainly wasn't my type. He was rather slippery, far too slippery for my liking, I'm afraid. He's been with more women than I've had hot dinners in my entire life, I'm most sure.
Well, Julius saw me in the yard. He joined me for a smoke. I think he said something like,
"You and I have the same bright idea. I also came out here for a smoke. It's a beautiful night tonight, isn't it? But not nearly as beautiful as you are, Anna. I hope your husband appreciates how lucky he is to have a wife like you."
"Oh, goodness, Anna,
You didn't fall for his smooth talking, surely not.
I'm afraid, Dorothy, I'm ashamed to tell you this, but I did. I was literally putty in his hands. At this point, I was so drunk, I hardly knew what I was doing, Dorothy. We got talking. One thing led to another, and we both went into the barn together on the property, where all the horse feed and hay is kept, and just, got far too carried away. At one point, I saw a couple of flashes. Now I know it was someone taking pictures of us. Can you believe that?
I can't believe you went off with Julius, Anna, and cheated on your husband like this. This is not like you. It is so out of character for you to have done something like this.
I guess I've only ever been with my husband. Julius was so attractive, wasn't he? I was beguiled by his charms, and with all that drink inside me, my inhibitions just slipped away. Let's just say the following morning, in my sober mindset, I couldn't believe what I'd done, Dorothy. I felt so much self-disgust, because I'd been so dreadfully drunk. I'd never have had a frolic in the hay with Julius in normal circumstances. I mean, we were together for less than an hour, and then went our separate ways as if nothing had happened. I wasn't stupid. I knew he was just using me and taking advantage of my blooded state. My husband had no way of knowing that right under his nose I had brazenly cheated on him. But someone must have known what I'd done, and that someone sneakily took pictures of us together, in our shameful state of undress. I feel so desperately ashamed, Dorothy, because if James gets his hands on those photographs, I know he will never ever forgive me. I know what he's like, Dorothy, and furthermore he would think that I behaved like a whore. And the worst part of it, Dorothy, is he'd be absolutely right. What self-respecting woman would behave like a bitch on heat, like I did that night?
Anna, don't be so hard on yourself. You were very drunk. It happened a long time ago. You've grown up a lot since then, matured considerably. You made one little mistake, which you gravely regret. The Morrisons' party was so long ago, I'd almost forgotten all about it until you reminded me of the event. Everyone left the party 2 sheets to the wind, and you were no exception to that rule. You've been with James for years and years. He's not going to leave you for one little indiscretion, is he? That happened at the Morrisons' party when you were as drunk as a skunk and completely out of your right mind. You've never pursued any relationship with Julius after that, have you? You've chosen to stay faithful to James. If I were you, I would tell him what's going on. Tell him someone at that party a long time ago sneakily took photographs of you in a compromising position, and all of a sudden, many years later, they're trying to blackmail you. Maybe they're strapped for cash and decided that a bit of blackmailing wouldn't go amiss.
But you don't know what James is like, Dorothy. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Even if I made one tiny mistake, James will feel as if our marriage has been nothing but a sham, and has been contaminated and soiled, if you know what I mean. Like a white sheet that has come out of the wash all pink because of a red sock. The sheet is never the same after that, is it? We've been true to each other all our lives, Dorothy. If James learns what I did that night at the Morrisons' party, it'll absolutely break his heart and destroy him. I'm worried he'll look at me differently, as if somehow I'm defiled and impure.
You're going to have to tell him, Anna. You don't have a choice in the matter. Or this person is going to take advantage of you by blackmailing you and bleeding you dry, and you don't want that to happen. If you keep paying him or her, James is going to want to know what is going on, and why your funds in your account are being depleted. Once he knows the truth, your blackmailer will have to stop threatening you. In my experience, it's best to always tell the truth in relationships and be damned with it. Tell James how dreadfully sorry you are, how it didn't mean a thing with Julius, and how much you love him. If James cannot forgive you, then he's not the man I thought he was, Anna."
Anna was silent for a moment, and then drew in a deep breath. "You're absolutely right. I haven't got a choice, have I? I'm going to have to tell him my darkest secret. Oh, goodness gracious, I'm so scared. I don't know how he's going to react. But I can't continue to be blackmailed like this, can I? I know what I'll do. I'll tell him tonight and be done with it. I'm terrified out of my wits, of course I am. But I just can't go on being blackmailed like this." "So did Anna tell James Torval what she'd done?" I asked. Marjorie shrugged her shoulders.
"You know I don't know the answer to that question, Juvenna. But my hunch is she did. And telling him probably had dire consequences for her. Because the very next day, Anna Torval had completely disappeared and gone missing. Even though the police were asking all kinds of questions, my mother never chose to tell them about Anna's dark secret. She didn't feel Anna would appreciate her dirty laundry being aired for all and sundry, if you understand, even in a police investigation. Furthermore, if James was responsible for her death, which I rather suspect he was, Anna Torval would never have wanted him to get into any trouble with the police. She was a very forgiving woman like that. Let's just say, Juvenna, in the grand scheme of things, in my opinion, it's awfully convenient that she vanishes a day after she was going to tell James Torval about her infidelity at the Morrisons' party. She told my mother she would tell him that very night, and the very next day James informed us that Anna had gone missing after a walk in the woods. Everyone was looking for her. I don't know about you, Juvenna, but I don't take coincidences like this kindly."
I gasped with what Marjorie had revealed to me. "So you think he killed his wife, Anna, in a burst of unbridled rage, because, as you said, he put his wife on a pedestal, thought she was absolutely perfect, Anna had always been loyal and intimate with only him, and then he discovers the horrifying truth that his wife wasn't as squeaky clean as he'd hoped, and that was probably like a brick being flung against his face for him, and for a moment I suspect he completely lost it."
"Yes, I do, Juvenna. I couldn't put it better myself. I think he killed his wife. Not intentionally, of course. But I guess his wife's horrifying revelation blew up in his face, rather like a flame to a gas canister. Don't get me wrong, Juvenna. James Torval was a wonderful, wonderful man. I can't dispute that for a second. But even the most upstanding among us can become furiously angry and indignantly outraged when we're grievously upset about something. I don't think James purposely killed her. I think he lashed out at her in a moment of fury, accidentally killing her because she was a very petite woman, you see, not short like me, but very slender. And I suppose after her death, he suffered a dreadful grief, remorse, and guilt about what he'd done, but also the real pain of losing his very best friend. Have you ever been so mad, Juvenna, that you lost all sense of what you were doing and just blew a fuse? I know I have. I did one night when my husband returned late, and he always kept in touch with me, told me where he was going, so to speak. But on this occasion he failed to do so. So I thought he'd been tragically killed in a car wreck,
and nonchalantly walked through the door,
as if nothing at all had happened. I was so angry with him. I flew at him, almost hit him in the chest, saying, "How could you do this to me? I thought you were dead." I have never been that mad before.
I thought about it for a brief moment. Not really, but if someone hurt me badly enough, I guess I could lose it. Maybe I'd start throwing things around if I was very frustrated. And that's when you can do a lot of damage, because imagine if you hit someone with a bottle of wine or something. It could be terrible, the consequences of something like that.
Exactly. Well, there you go, dear. James Torval was a big man, And like you say, he could have thrown a bottle of wine at his wife and done so much damage to her. Anna Torval was a very, very slight woman by comparison to him. I think she was less than 100 pounds, you know. James Torval was 3 times her size, a very solidly built, strapping man. If he'd lashed out at her, it wouldn't have taken much for him to kill her. But I believe if he did, it was an accident. And I think, in a blind panic, he chose to cover up his tracks, as no one wants to spend the rest of their lives in a jail cell, do they? And James is the sort of man who wouldn't have coped in a prison environment. I think he'd have rather hung himself than gone to jail. I'm certain of that.
So you don't believe she was killed by a bear? A grizzly, I mean?
Absolutely not, said Marjorie.
So what do you think James Torval did with Anna Torval's body? I asked Marjorie.
Well, my guess is he must have buried her somewhere in the wood grove, said Marjorie matter-of-factly. Of course I could be wrong. Don't forget the police closed the case. They absolutely believed Anna Torval had been killed by a grizzly. James Torval was highly respected in the local community and was a good friend of the town sheriff. No one would believe he was capable of hurting his wife. He was a man of unblemished character, and everyone knew he idolized Anna Torval, never laying a finger on her ever.
My interesting conversation with Marjorie regretfully ended abruptly as Aunt Jane appeared on the porch carrying a tray with a teapot and some cups and saucers, glasses of lemonade, and Marjorie's delectable blueberry and apple pie, served with large scoops of cream, which I barely tasted. My mind was filled with the thoughts of Anna Torval's secret. I was of the opinion that the blackmailer was a woman, probably the one that was jealous of Anna marrying James. But perhaps some answers will never be forthcoming. Soon Anna Torval was long forgotten about, not by me, of course, as we all began to talk garrulously about other more current things. But Anna's story began to burrow itself in my mind, and I became convinced that Marjorie was absolutely right, and that Anna Torval had never been the victim of a grizzly bear attack. I was sure that in a moment of heated rage, James Torval had killed his wife. And not only was I certain of this, I had a deep knowing in my heart that this was indeed the case. In the days that followed after Marjorie's visit, I noticed that Lankum continued to exhibit his strange behaviour. He appeared to be talking to someone we could not see, and included Anna Torval in all his pictures, which was rather unsettling for me. I informed Aunt Jane about what was going on, and about my concerns regarding my brother's idiosyncratic behaviour, but she assured me that children will be children, that I had nothing to worry about, that Lankum was including Anna Torval in all his pictures, simply because I had talked about the woman so much, and I knew that was true. One morning, after an enjoyable breakfast of pancakes, maple syrup, and crispy bacon, cooked to absolute perfection by Aunt Jane herself, later on in the morning, I was sitting on the wraparound porch with my brother, overseeing Lankum, who was happily scribbling away with his drawings. Ever since he began to include Anna Torval in all his pictures, I had been paying closer attention to them. There was a small part of me that was wondering if my brother's invisible friend, that he kept appearing to be talking to, could in fact be the dead woman herself, communicating with him in some way. It wasn't impossible to believe this, because I'd seen Anna Torval vividly in my own dreams, with her distinctive red hair and blue eyes, and at the time I hadn't even known that my dreams were an accurate depiction of her. How could I possibly have known that Anna Torval had red hair and blue eyes? I had heard that children were much more in tune with the spirit world, which is a gift that leaves them when they become more worldly wise. Could the spirit of Anna Torval be reaching out to Lankum in some way in death? Maybe she wanted people to know her story, and by all accounts, if my dreams were anything to go by, maybe she had been reaching out to me as well. Was it so far-fetched to believe that? I wasn't sure. It was when Lankum showed me the picture he'd drawn that my blood went cold. "What is this, Lankum?" I said, studying the picture. I could see my brother had drawn a big hole in the ground where a lady was lying, and there was a man standing outside the hole with a trowel in his hand. "Anna told me to draw this for you. She's in the hole in the ground, can you see? The man dug the hole. He put Anna into it. Anna told me that I must show this to you." "Does Anna talk to you?" I asked my brother. "Or is she make-believe?" "She's not make-believe," said Lankum brusquely. "She's real. She comes and sees me when I'm napping. Sometimes she also visits me in my dreams." "And she wanted you to draw this picture for me. Did she say why?" "She wants you to know her story. That's what she told me." "That's what she told you?" "Yes, that's what she told me." "I tell you what," I said to Lankum. "How about we go and visit Marjorie and show her the picture that you've drawn? You can tell her what you've told me. She was a friend with Anna Torval, and I'm sure she'd like to see your picture. We'll ask Aunt Jane if we can go and see her. We can take a shortcut through the woods. Would you like that? You never know. Maybe Marjorie will make us some of her fudge. And I know how much you like that." At this, Lankum's face broke out into a wide smile. "We're going to see Marjorie. She really likes the pictures I draw. And I really love her fudge. It's yummy." "Of course she likes your pictures, Lankum, because they're excellent, aren't they? But my bet is she's going to especially like this one you've drawn of Anna Torval, because you've drawn her story, haven't you?" Aunt Jane thankfully gave us permission to go to Marjorie's house and take a shortcut through the woods. After I was certain that Anna Torval had probably not been killed by a grizzly bear, the woods no longer seemed so menacing to me. And as I ventured through the trees, holding my little brother's hand and taking the trail marked the willows, I was struck by how perfectly beautiful everything was. We eagerly marched down the richly fertile footpath, covered with fallen leaves and bespeckled with a plethora of rocks. Aunt Jane had assured me the trail wasn't desperately long, but I knew that if Lankum got tired, I could easily carry him the rest of the way. He wasn't too heavy. I almost felt silly as I walked through the tall, lofty trees. How could I have been so intimidated by such an idyllic setting as this? As now, in the true light of day, my fears seemed completely groundless. I should have explored the wood grove a long time ago, I thought. My apprehension of what had happened to Anna Torval all those years ago had successfully robbed me not only of confidence, but of rational reasoning and common sense. It was 10 o'clock in the morning, and the injections of soft light easily spilled through the trees in a tumble of prepossessing gossamer sparkles that brushed its shades over the foliage so that the leaves practically shimmered. There was a still breeze blowing against our faces, and the trees in the woods jiggled their branches almost as if they were dancing. Me and my brother heard the pretty bird song above our heads, an orchestra of tweets and warbles. All of a sudden Lankum broke away from my hands and began running down a narrow path through the trees. What on earth was he doing, I wondered. "Lankum!" I called. "Come back! You're going the wrong way. The pathway to the willows is straight ahead. You'll get us both hopelessly lost. Come back! Come back now!" Lankum could run reasonably fast for a 5-year-old boy, but he appeared to have suddenly become conveniently deaf, as if my words that I called out to him had not been at all heeded. Why did he fail to listen to me like this? It was such a prepossessing day, and I didn't want to be mad at my brother. But when he didn't listen to me, I couldn't help becoming snappy, with very good reason, of course. I considered myself to be a pretty patient, long-suffering person, but when Lankum became willfully insubordinate, I could feel my temperature rise and the indignation heat up in my chest, like a cobra beginning to strike out. "Come back now, Lankum! What do you think you're doing? Aunt Jane told you to stick by my side. We need to keep together in the woods." Lankum ignored me and was standing still further down the path, with his back away from me. I felt furious with him by his idiosyncratic behaviour, but I ran up to him. I was about to give him a firm piece of my mind and then drag him back to the footpath so we could make our way to the willows, where Marjorie resided. I stopped short in my tracks. Lankum was pointing at a whole mountain of stones, layered one on top of another. They were awfully big. I stared at the big mound of stones. Someone had painstakingly taken their time to layer them on top of each other. In my opinion, it looked rather like a burial mound of some kind. Lankum looked up at me and said, Anna wanted to show me where she's lying, he said. She's under these stones, he said matter-of-factly. I looked at Lankum nonplussed. She told you that? Yeah, she's in the hole under the ground, said Lankum. She wants you to know where she is. She's under these stones. She says she just doesn't want to be forgotten, that's all. I was so stunned by my little brother's revelations that I picked up a couple of small stones on the side of the mound to examine them. I wondered if James Torval had laboured under the sun to lift these monumental huge stones together to mark his wife's grave. But wouldn't it be an obvious thing for him to do, that might indeed draw the attention of the police? But who else would choose to mark Anna Torval's resting place like this? And furthermore, some of the stones at the very bottom of the mound were so massively huge that not even the world's strongest man would likely be able to lift them. The mound was like a miniature leaning tower of Pisa. I'd never seen anything quite like this before in my entire life. In its own way, it was quite spectacular. And if this had been my own grave marker, I would have been honoured. Why I examined a couple of stones, I do not know. But when I picked up a stone, the next thing I knew is pebbles began to come flying at me through the trees. I was so taken aback, so bemused, I stared at the trees to see if anybody was standing there. I knew pebbles didn't randomly come flying at you for no good reason at all. I put the rock back on the mound and then picked up another to see what would happen, and once again a plethora of little pebbles went flying towards me, scattering around us like hailstones. For a moment Lankum looked rather befuddled. Then he pointed eagerly towards the trees and began to giggle, as if the flying stones were part of a fabulously fun game. The monkey man over there wants you to stop touching the stones. What monkey man? I said. I don't see anyone. I looked around the woodgrove, wondering why my brother was talking about a monkey man. Could he have seen someone loitering around in the woods, I wondered. My eyes hurriedly scavenged the trees. I was determined to find out who'd thrown the stones at us. I wasn't exactly scared at this point, only intrigued. Hello, I called out. Is anybody there? Everything became silent for a brief moment. I swear in that second the entire woodgrove became ominously quiet. The kind of unsettling quiet my Aunt Jane had warned me about. It would seem the breeze retreated, the birds ceased their singing, and even the light spilling through the trees retracted, so the woodgrove almost became dark, and dare I say it, incredibly intimidating. It was almost as if the woods themselves, that had been initially so welcoming towards us, and so benevolent, became hostile and unfriendly, as if I had provoked everything in my midst to anger. It was then I knew unequivocally that someone was there, and they were watching me. I could feel eyes drilling through me, as tangibly as I could feel my brother's hand slip into mine. He looked up at me earnestly and said, "The monkey man wants us to go. He doesn't want you to touch the stones. He says you mustn't touch them." I think most people in my circumstances would have sensed the foreboding in the woods and paid the feeling prompt attention. But I was not most people, and with an unquenchable curiosity I wanted to see who it was that had thrown the stones at me. Who had had such an audacity to do something like that? Perhaps if I picked up another stone from this pile, I might smoke this person out of their hiding place. So that is exactly what I did. But I had not prepared myself for what was to happen next. All of a sudden more pebbles went flying indiscriminately, in a flurry in my direction. I heard a rustle of leaves, a snapping of twigs, and a warning growl. I quickly put the rock back on the pile, like a guilty shoplifter who realizes she's been spotted by security doing something illegal and knows she's not going to get away with it. I realized my impulse to pick up another rock from this mound had been a monumental mistake on my part. My heart began to beat furiously in my chest as I observed a dark, shadowy silhouette moving towards me. At first the gargantuan figure was vague and obscure, shielded by the leafy foliage of the trees. But after one powerful snap, a branch went flying to the ground, and following this, a Titanic-sized creature emerged through the leafy foliage. To give Lankum his due, my brother did not appear to be remotely afraid of the creature he called the monkey man. But I was the one that was about to wet myself. There are no words to describe the terror that launched its way into my bloodstream, giving me an instinctive desire to run away from the woodgrove as fast as I possibly could. The creature was standing mere feet away from me. He was far too close for comfort. Indeed, if he had reached out towards me, he could have easily touched me. I knew at once what he was, but never in a million months of Sundays would I have ever remotely believed that I would encounter such an unorthodox creature. That was the sort of thing that always happened to other people, but not to little old me. Yet here I was, making full eye contact with a male Bigfoot. I was naturally filled with terror, but at the very same time, I was also thrilled. Rather like when you take a roller coaster ride, and you're all shaken up. The Bigfoot was powerfully built, strapping, at least 9 to 10 foot tall, with so much muscle density that I'm certain it would have been nothing for him to pick up a car. He had a pyramid-shaped head, a very human-looking face, with high cheekbones and hooded eyes. He was covered in dark hair. I could see he was not remotely amused with me, but when he spoke to me, I nearly fainted, especially when the communication became almost telepathic, as the words were translated into my mind in English. Kanitali no, ha sinatala, omokotola, ha nitali kwasi. You must not pick up those stones. I put them there myself, to mark her burial place. She doesn't want you to move her. She likes being here in the woods. She just wanted you to know her story. But leave her be, will you? I'm so sorry, I said, in my head silently. The Bigfoot nodded. Ka tinatala pa, sonatilatu, kasinakwa. Leave her be, he repeated. She loves this place. And with that he turned around and was gone from our sight, almost as if he had never been there at all. When I told Marjorie this extraordinary story, and I showed her the picture that my brother Lankham had drawn, we both agreed that Anna had been communicating with my brother. She had shown him that James Torval had buried her in the woods, and the Bigfoot had pointed out that the mound of stones was her resting place. The following day my brother drew a picture of Anna climbing a stairway to heaven. She was waving at us. She says she's going now, my brother told me. She wants us to know her story. She just didn't want to be forgotten, but she said to tell you that James didn't mean to hurt her. It was an accident. I was so glad that my brother was able to fill in the blanks for me as to what had actually happened to Anna Torval all those years ago. But in the end, I guess we'll never really know the details of that story. I'm glad to say my mother recovered fully from her stroke, but never regained any trust in doctors. I guess some things just never change. I was very sad to return home after my fabulous stint in Canada, but it's a time of my life that I will never ever forget. I'm quite sure that Anna Torval's grave is still being protected by the Bigfoot to this day, so woe betide anyone who messes with those stones on her burial mound. There'll be hell to pay. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, wasn't that the most incredible story? That blew my mind. What an incredible story. And it seems as if the Bigfoot really reached out to Anna Torval and put up a lovely burial mound for her. And no one is able to touch it, that's for sure.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my Omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.